Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight we have another set of paranormal stories, and the first one is about strange things happening at home after a half-brother moved out. Before we start, please subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on notifications so you know when a new video is up. The person who sent this in says their half-brother used to be into rituals, auras, and energies. So when noises started happening after he left, it was hard not to think about him. Make yourself comfortable, and I hope you sleep well tonight. I don't know, maybe this will sound strange, and maybe it'll just get brushed off as one of those stories people tell late at night. But this really happened to me not too long ago. At home, there are 4 of us now. My mom, my dad, my baby sister who's barely over a year old, and me. But a few months ago, my stepbrother Mateo was living with us too. Mateo was very into spiritual stuff. I mean, really into it. He talked about energies, protection rituals, abundance, auras, all of that. His room was always messy, but in between the piles of clothes and dishes, you'd find little jars full of grains, strange symbols drawn on paper, candles, seeds, charms, things like that. It always felt like his room had its own weather. When he finally moved out, I'm not going to lie, my mom and I felt relieved. We never had the best relationship with him. There was always tension in the house when he was around. But before he left, he said something that stuck with me. He said, "Well, now you won't have anyone watching over you." At the time, we laughed. It sounded dramatic, almost ridiculous. But later, when I was alone with my thoughts, I realized it had unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. And maybe it scared me because I had already experienced something before. The day my little sister was born, I was home alone, taking a shower. I stepped backward, and I swear I stepped on someone's foot. Not a towel, not a shampoo bottle, a foot. I remember freezing for half a second, then getting angry instead of scared, because that's how I react. I cursed into the air and basically threatened whatever was there to leave me alone. So, after Mateo moved out, I tried not to think too much about what he'd said. A few days later, my mom and I were sleeping in the same room. We had stayed up watching soap operas, and when we finally turned everything off and lay down, we heard a door close. Not just any door, Mateo's old bedroom door. My first thought was, of course, that slob probably came back to grab dirty dishes or something. But almost immediately, I remembered he didn't live there anymore. I looked over at my mom, waiting for her to react, but she seemed calm, like maybe she hadn't heard it. For about 3 seconds, I tried to convince myself I imagined it. Then, in the silence, we heard it again. The same door closing. This time, neither of us said anything at first. My mom got up and checked the house. We live in a quiet, safe neighborhood, and the doors were locked. There was no sign that anyone had come in, so we went back to bed and tried to sleep. Then came the knocking. It wasn't exactly a normal knock. It sounded more like someone leaning their weight against the door. A heavy pressure. A dull push. My little sister, who is usually noisy and babbles nonstop, went completely still. She didn't cry. She didn't move. She just got serious and quiet, like even she knew something was wrong. Then it happened again. I went pale. I remember getting up to lock the bedroom door, and as I passed the bathroom connected to the room, I saw a white glow coming from underneath the door. The bathroom light is yellow, and it wasn't even turned on. I went straight back to bed and looked at my mom. She didn't panic. She just held my sister close, turned on some horror stories, and tried to make it feel normal enough for us to fall asleep. But I couldn't sleep. Not for a long time. And just when I finally started drifting off, we heard the vacuum cleaner. It's an old, loud vacuum, the kind you can hear from anywhere in the house. I swear I heard it moving through the living room, like someone was pushing it back and forth. Then it stopped. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but little things kept happening after that. Books from a high shelf in my room suddenly fell, even though nobody had touched them. Things started going missing, especially spoons and forks. My parents say it might be duendes, because apparently they've dealt with things like that before. They even say we should leave sweets out for them. Honestly, I don't know what I believe. Part of me thinks that sounds pointless. Another part of me is too nervous to argue, and I still haven't told them everything. I haven't told them that I saw my sister's toy turn on by itself. I even have a video of it. And maybe that's the part that scares me most. Not the doors, not the light, not even the vacuum. It's knowing that whatever is in this house isn't just making noise anymore. It wants us to notice. It's been a little over 10 years since I lived in the house I grew up in, and I only recently found out that my younger brother, Mason, experienced things there too. I always knew that house felt wrong in certain places, but I didn't realize just how much he had seen until much later. A little backstory first. The house was an old farmhouse, built sometime in the early 1900s. From what we were told, it used to be a gathering place for farmers in the area. There were even stories that Henry Ford may have owned it for a brief time, although I can't say for sure if that part is true. But what I can say is this: almost every part of that house felt haunted. The kitchen and living room were probably the only rooms that ever felt somewhat safe. Everywhere else had this heavy feeling, like you were being watched from corners you couldn't quite see. Growing up, I always sensed things, but Mason saw more than I ever knew. He told me there was a little girl who followed him around the house. We even have a picture where something that looks like her is near him. He said she would follow him almost everywhere, except into the basement. And the basement was a completely different kind of fear. But first, I want to talk about the shadow with the red eyes. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night because I had to use the bathroom. I remember walking toward the dining room, still half asleep, and then I stopped. There was something standing near the cabinets. It was looking right at me. The only light in the room came from the moon shining through the window, so I couldn't make out a face or any clear shape. It was just a dark shadow, maybe 6 feet away from me. But I remember the eyes. They were red. What makes it even stranger is that our bird, who usually made noise at everything, was completely silent. Not a chirp, not a rustle, nothing. I should have been terrified right away, but I think my mind was trying to protect me from fully understanding what I was seeing. Years later, Mason told me he had seen the same thing. He was only around 6 years old at the time. Back then, my mom, Mason, and I would sometimes all sleep in my room together. One night, he woke up and saw a black shadow with red eyes standing right beside the bed, staring directly at him. That shook me, because I had never told him exactly what I had seen. And that was only one piece of it. There were so many stories from that house, especially from people who were sensitive to that kind of energy. On the main floor, there was the kitchen, living room, dining room, one bedroom, bathroom, mudroom leading to the basement, and a bar room. Every space had its own feeling. A family friend once couldn't sleep, so he went down to the living room and turned on the TV. At some point, he looked toward the window, and in the reflection, he saw a tall black mass standing behind the chair he was sitting in. My mom once woke up with her blanket wrapped so tightly around her throat that she had to fight to get it off. One of the first nights I slept in the small bedroom with my mom, she got up to use the bathroom, and suddenly I couldn't move. I remember lying there, completely frozen, feeling like something was in the room with me. Another family friend tried sleeping in that same small bedroom and said he couldn't rest because he saw a female spirit pacing around the room. Eventually, she sat down on the bed beside him. The bar room was another place where you never felt alone. It always felt like something was above you, hovering somehow. I hated being in there for too long. There was also a radio in the kitchen that would go off around 3 in the morning, even when it was unplugged. It played the same eerie line, something like, "She will haunt you through the night." After a while, we made sure everything that didn't need to be plugged in was unplugged before bed. One night, my mom was playing a game on the computer when she saw what looked like a pale, ghostly hand reach out from the bedroom doorway. And then there were the sounds from the basement. A few times, it sounded like someone was taking a sledgehammer and slamming it into the basement walls. The first time I heard it, I was alone in the house with Mason. It was so loud that the living room walls seemed to shake and the closet door started rattling. Later, my parents and a few cousins heard it too during a family game night, after everyone was supposed to be asleep. Upstairs, there were 3 bedrooms and a full bathroom. That area had its own strange activity. I would come home and find my toys moved around, or things placed somewhere I knew I hadn't left them. One time, I was sitting on the floor playing, and my closet door was cracked open just a little. I looked up, and the door slowly started opening wider, inch by inch, like someone was peeking out at me. After that, I kept that closet shut as much as I could. Anytime it was open, I felt this awful dread in my stomach. Mason used to sleep in my room sometimes, and he later admitted that he saw shadows in there all the time. He just never told anyone. Looking back, it makes sense why I never wanted to sleep alone. I always needed a pet with me. Our dog hated being in my room, but he would stay until I fell asleep. Then he'd leave. Mason also refused to take a bath unless someone stayed in the bathroom with him. I always felt like someone was standing outside the bathroom door too, so honestly, I understood. He hated being alone in that house, and I don't blame him at all. Then there was the basement. The basement had a laundry room, 3 small storage rooms with heavy wooden doors, and a little cellar. None of us liked going down there. It had this dark, nasty feeling that seemed to sit in the air. In the cellar, there was a chair sitting in the middle of the room with an old case of beer bottles nearby. We never used that room. It was basically left alone. But one day, my mom heard one of those bottles break down there. Another time, one of the heavy wooden storage doors slammed shut when no one was in the basement. Every time I had to go down there, I would take a deep breath first, like I was preparing myself. I always felt like something was watching me from just outside the laundry room. The lighting was terrible, and I would run back up the stairs as fast as I could. I honestly don't think even the dog wanted to go down there. That house had a way of making you feel watched, even when you were standing in an empty room. And the strangest part is that for years, I thought maybe it was mostly just me. But now that Mason has told me what he saw too, I know it wasn't just my imagination. That house had something in it. Maybe more than one thing. And whatever it was, it made sure we knew we were never truly alone. So this happened sometime around 2020, when I was still a teenager. My parents and I had just moved into a new house, and at first, everything felt almost perfect. The house was nice, the neighborhood seemed quiet, and we honestly thought we were starting fresh. My dad traveled a lot for work back then. His business trips usually lasted a few days, sometimes almost a week, so most of the time it was just my mom and me at home. And because I had school during the day, my mom was often in the house by herself. She told me later that almost from the beginning, she felt like something was wrong. She kept getting this feeling that someone was following her around the house. Not exactly standing in front of her, but always nearby, always behind her. always watching. At first, she didn't say anything. She didn't want to scare me, and she knew my dad probably wouldn't believe it anyway. He's never really believed in spirits or anything like that. Then things started happening, only when my mom was alone. She would hear heavy footsteps in empty rooms, loud thuds from upstairs. Utensils would fall in the kitchen when no one was there. Sometimes it sounded like someone was moving furniture, but when she checked, nothing had changed. Eventually, she got scared enough to tell my dad. He listened, but I don't think he really knew what to say. Then he left for another business trip and told her he'd deal with it when he got back. My mom didn't want to stay in that house, but since he was only going to be gone for 4 or 5 days, she tried to manage. Luckily, I was on school break, so I was home with her most of the time. One night, I heard my mom scream. I ran to her room and found her sitting on the floor in the corner beside the bed. She was shaking. I asked her what happened, and she told me she had seen someone pass by. Someone with orange eyes. I was terrified, but we didn't know what else to do, so we kept all the lights on and slept like that for the rest of the night. After more things kept happening, my mom finally called her parents. They came over right away and brought things for a cleansing ritual. My grandmother told my mom to repeat a prayer because whatever was in the house seemed to be affecting her the most. But when my mom started saying the prayer, she began choking. She was sweating badly and she couldn't get the words out. She kept saying something was stopping her, like it was pressing on her throat and wouldn't let her finish. The ritual had to be stopped halfway through. My grandparents said they would come back the next day and try again. But that night was awful. While my mom was sleeping, she started screaming my name. At first it was loud, then each scream got weaker and weaker. By the time I reached her room, she had stopped. I asked her what happened, and she told me the same figure had been on top of her body. She said it had orange eyes and thick, dark, messy hair, and she could feel its weight on her. She didn't just dream it. She said she saw it and felt it. By then, my dad had come back home, and after that, even he started noticing things. That was when we knew we had to leave. Before moving out, my mom wanted to speak to the landlord. We had also been hearing what sounded like a girl crying at night, almost every night. When my mom asked about it, the landlord finally admitted that a girl had died in that house. We were already planning to leave, so we tried not to focus on that too much. We just wanted out. But while we were cleaning and packing, we found something that still makes my stomach turn when I think about it. There was a bundle of thick black hair hidden inside the house, beside a heavy old book, a Ouija board, used candles, and a small black keychain. We rushed to the landlord and asked who had lived there before us. She said the previous tenants were a group of people who used to perform rituals in the house. She claimed she didn't know exactly what they were doing. My dad was furious. He asked her why she never told us any of this before we moved in. And she said she didn't mention it because no one had ever stayed in that house for more than 3 months. My dad just snapped and said, "No wonder." After that, we left. We moved to another state and tried to put the whole thing behind us. A few years later, things had finally become normal again. We were in a different house. Life felt calm, and for a while, I really thought everything was over. My dad would go to work, and my mom liked going for walks in the evening. Sometimes I'd be home alone, either studying or just relaxing. One day, I was watching horror movies and reading about jinns. I know, terrible timing. That's when I started hearing noises from the living room. At first, they were small sounds. I went to check, but there was nothing there. Then it happened again, and again. I checked 2 or 3 times, and still nothing. The 4th time, the sound was much louder. When I walked out, the glass table in our living room suddenly fell right in front of me and shattered. It was a big table too, not something that could just tip over easily. I ran to the bathroom and started crying. Thankfully, I had my phone with me, so I called my mom and told her what was happening. At first, she didn't believe me. I think she wanted to believe we were safe now, that whatever happened in the old house had stayed there. But she told me she was coming home. The problem was, I had locked the front door from the inside, and I had the key. Usually my mom would lock it and take the keys with her, but that day, I was the one who had them. So I had to leave the bathroom and unlock the door myself. I gathered every bit of courage I had and slowly stepped out. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then I looked toward the hallway. I saw a tall black figure wearing an orange gown walk right in front of me. I completely froze. My mind just went blank. Then I ran straight to the front door, unlocked it, and got out of the house. Right at that moment, my mom arrived. I showed her the broken glass and told her exactly what I had seen. We never told my dad about that second incident. I still live in that same house now, and thankfully, nothing major has happened since then. But some days, I still get this feeling that something is around me. Not always. Just some days. And when that feeling comes back, I remember those orange eyes. It was Rosh Hashanah in 2025, and I remember getting home from work sometime around 3 in the afternoon. I was exhausted, honestly. My whole body had that end-of-the-day heaviness, but I was also grateful to be home, ready to settle in and mark the new year in my own quiet way. But the second I opened my apartment door, I felt it. Something was wrong. Not wrong in a clear, dramatic way. Nothing was tipped over. Nothing was missing. The place looked exactly how I had left it. But there was this pressure in the air, this strange heaviness, like someone had been standing in my living room just minutes before I walked in. My apartment isn't big. It's basically one open space for the living room and kitchen, with my bedroom and bathroom off to the side. So I stood there for a while, just looking around, trying to catch whatever my mind thought it had noticed. But there was nothing. Eventually, I told myself, "Eliam, you're tired. You're imagining things." So I locked the door, made myself something small to eat, and went to lie down for a bit. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, because I woke up suddenly with my heart racing. It felt like a loud noise had snapped me awake, but when I stayed still and listened, there was nothing at all. No footsteps, no voices, no movement, just silence. I got out of bed and opened my bedroom door, and across the apartment, tucked into the far corner of the kitchen, I saw something. A shadow. But not the kind you get from furniture or poor lighting. This was darker than the dark around it. It had shape. It had presence. And then, it shifted. It moved. I didn't think. I just reached for the wall and flipped on the light. The shadow disappeared instantly. That should have made me feel better, but it didn't. It made everything worse, because now I knew I hadn't imagined it. Still, I tried to stay calm. I went back to bed, told myself there had to be some explanation, and eventually started drifting off again. Then I heard it. A soft clicking sound. If you've ever heard a dog walking across a kitchen floor, claws tapping against tile or linoleum, that's exactly what it sounded like. Click, click, click. Slow at first, then closer. Then my bedroom door burst open. It slammed into the dresser so hard that everything on top of it crashed to the floor. Before I could even sit up properly, something rushed into the room, and I still don't know how to describe it without sounding completely insane. Its body moved like an animal, low to the ground, quick, smooth. Too smooth, like it didn't have bones the way living things are supposed to have bones. But the head was human. Or it had been human once. The face looked sunken and ruined, like something dead that had no business moving. The eyes were empty, but not blank. That's the part I hate remembering. They looked empty and aware at the same time. Over its head was an old, torn tallit, a prayer shawl, but it wasn't resting on the thing normally. The fabric drifted around it, almost floating, like it was underwater. It kept rippling in these slow waves even though there was no wind in the room, and it was coming right at me. The strange thing is, I didn't freeze. I thought I would, but I didn't. I swung at it. I actually tried to hit it, but it moved out of the way so easily, almost lazily, like it already knew what I was going to do. Then I remembered the kitchen shadow, the light. I threw my hand toward the switch and hit it, and it was gone. Just gone. My room was empty again, except for the mess on the floor and the sound of me breathing like I had just run miles. I didn't sleep after that. I just sat there with the light on, staring at the door, waiting for something else to happen. And around 4 a.m, it did. 2 figures came walking straight through my bedroom wall. They weren't like the first thing. They looked almost human, pale and faded, like people made out of fog. And they didn't seem interested in me at all. They were talking to each other quietly, casually, like they had walked into a room they visited every day. One of them even pulled out the chair by my desk and sat down. That was when I reached over and flipped the light on again. Both of them vanished, instantly. And since that night, I don't sleep in the dark anymore. I should probably start by saying this. I do believe there are things out there that we don't fully understand. I'm not someone who jumps straight to, "It was definitely a ghost," or anything like that. Usually I'm more comfortable saying, "I don't know what it was. I can't explain it. I can't be sure." But I've seen enough strange things in my life that I try not to dismiss anything too quickly. I live in a suburb outside Boulder, Colorado, but my condo complex sits right up against a huge stretch of protected open space. There are trails, trees, ditches, brush, and a lot of wildlife. So when something odd happens at night, my first thought is usually, okay, maybe that was an animal. I moved into this condo about 7 months ago. About 6 weeks after I got here, I woke up suddenly around 1:45 in the morning to the most horrifying scream I have ever heard. It was sharp, loud, and completely unnatural. It lasted maybe 3 or 4 seconds. Then, after about 1 second of silence, it happened again. Same scream, same volume, same length. I just lay there frozen. It didn't sound like it was right outside my window. It seemed farther away, maybe from another building or somewhere beyond the parking lot. But it was loud enough to wake me from a dead sleep. At first, I tried to be rational. I started searching for animal sounds in Colorado. Foxes, owls, mountain lions, bobcats, coyotes, anything that might sound like a person screaming. And I did find a few animals that can make really unsettling noises. But the thing that bothered me was how identical the 2 screams were. They didn't rise or fall. They didn't shake or crack the way a human voice usually does. They were just perfectly even. Scream, pause, scream. I thought about calling the police, but I didn't know what I would even say. I heard a scream somewhere, kind of far away? I had no location, no details, nothing useful. And honestly, this is hard to explain, but it didn't sound like someone calling for help. It sounded more like something trying to scare whoever heard it. 2 months later, it happened again. Same time, 1:45 in the morning. The exact same 2 screams. I knew it wasn't my imagination because I had never forgotten the first time. The sound was burned into my mind. And this second time, everything matched. Same length, same volume, same little pause in between. I got out of bed and looked outside. The parking lot was still. The buildings were quiet. Nothing moved, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there. Then, about a month ago, something else happened. I was taking my dog, Milo, outside at around 4:45 in the morning. It was still dark, and the complex was completely quiet. That's when I saw this figure crossing the far side of the parking lot. It was incredibly tall. I mean, impossibly tall. Maybe 8 or 9 feet. And it was completely black. Not like a person wearing black clothes. It looked black all the way through, like a cutout moving across the world. It crossed the parking lot, stepped over the ditch, and headed toward the open space. Milo usually barks at everything. A leaf blows wrong, and he has an opinion about it. But this time, he didn't make a sound. He just stared. Then he suddenly wanted to go back inside, and so did I. That brings me to last night. I woke up again at 1:45. The scream came first, then the pause, then the second scream, exactly like before. And right after that, Milo started acting like he needed to go outside. He never wakes me up in the middle of the night, so I thought, okay, maybe he really has to go. But I was also thinking, wonderful, there may be some nightmare fox beast screaming outside. And now my 12-pound dog wants a midnight field trip. I convinced myself it was probably wildlife. I grabbed his leash, turned on the outside light, and took him down. But he barely went to the bathroom. He mostly sniffed around and stared into the dark, like he was checking the air. He didn't bark once. That scared me more than the screaming, honestly. I brought him back inside, locked the door, and we got back into bed. A little while later, I thought I heard something that sounded almost like a word. I couldn't make it out. It was soft and quick, and I told myself I was probably just rattled. Then the screams happened again. 2 more. Scream. Pause. Scream. That was the first time it ever happened twice in one night. This morning, I texted a couple of neighbors and asked if they had heard anything strange around 1:45. Both of them said no. One of them added, "This neighborhood is interesting," which is not exactly the comforting answer you want after a night like that. I tried to ask what they meant, but we don't talk much, and over text, they didn't really give me anything more. So I called a relative of mine, Elliot, who studies folklore and strange old stories. That kind of thing. I told him about the screams, how they're always the same volume, how they never waver, how they come in pairs with the same pause, how no one else seems to hear them. Then I told him about the tall black figure I saw near the open space. He got quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "Do you think it could be a banshee?" I've been looking up banshees all morning, but most of what I'm finding is from video games or fantasy stuff, and none of it feels very helpful. So I don't know what I heard. I don't know what I saw. All I know is that something keeps screaming at 1:45 in the morning, and my dog knows better than to bark at it. I used to live in this narrow little valley tucked into the Rockies, and because I rented for years, I moved around more than I ever wanted to. After quarantine, my partner Evan and I were desperate to get out of the tiny studio apartment we had been trapped in. We had a dog and a cat, so finding a pet-friendly place was not easy. When an old townhouse opened up on a quiet road, we grabbed it almost immediately. It sat in a strange spot, though. On one side there was a graveyard, on the other, a river. At the time, I told myself it was peaceful, maybe even charming in a gloomy mountain town sort of way. I have always been a little sensitive to places. I have had odd experiences before, mostly in old homes with heavy histories, but I try not to make a big production out of it. Some places carry things. That has always been my feeling. I usually just let whatever is there exist, and I go on existing too. Evan, on the other hand, did not believe in any of that, not even a little. Before we signed the lease, I walked through the townhouse with our dog, just to get a feel for it. Everything seemed calm. I went back a second time, and again, nothing felt wrong. We moved in during late spring, and for months it was quiet. Then fall came. About a week after Halloween, Evan decided he wanted to store our summer gear. He told me he had found a crawl space under the stairs. I had no idea it was there, and the second he said it, I felt this tight, sinking feeling in my stomach. I told him, "Please don't go down there." He laughed, of course. He thought I was being dramatic. He opened it anyway and climbed down into this underground space with a dirt floor and stone walls. It was bigger than I expected, maybe the size of a small room. I leaned in just far enough to look, and everything in me wanted to back away. The only thing down there was an old painting leaning against the wall. It showed a single bare tree on a hill at night. I hated it instantly. I told Evan not to store anything down there and to close it back up. The next day, I came home and found all our summer gear packed into that crawl space. And the painting was in the living room. I made him put it back immediately. That was when things started. At first, it was small. One night, we went out to dinner, and I left the hallway light on for the animals. I remember doing it clearly because I went back inside specifically to turn it on for our dog. When we came home, the light was off. Not burned out, not flickering. The switch had been flipped. That was easy enough to explain away, but I knew. Upstairs, there was a long hallway. Our bedroom was at one end, facing the river, and the spare room, which I used as an office, faced the graveyard. If the office door was open, you could look straight through the window and see the headstones. Evan never liked that room, so we usually kept the door closed. A few days later, I was working in the office when my cat knocked a heavy glass off my desk. It shattered. I swept it up and put the broken pieces in the upstairs bathroom trash. That evening, Evan and I were downstairs relaxing, and I decided to go up to the bedroom. I never turned on the stair lights, but for some reason, right before I stepped up, I got that same awful feeling. So I flipped the light on. There, sitting on the stairs, was a huge shard of glass from the cup. If I had taken one step in the dark, it would have gone straight into my foot. I checked the upstairs bathroom trash. The rest of the broken glass was still there, and the bin was upright. My cat could not have dragged that piece out, and my dog avoided the upstairs completely in that house. After that, things escalated quickly. We started seeing little balls of light in the living room. Our cat would chase them. Once, he was meowing near a hanging plant, and I watched one of the macrame tassels swing out and smack him right in the face. There was no fan on, no window open, nothing moving in the room. Then one night, around 3:30 in the morning, we heard a massive crash from the office. We had an industrial shelf in there with a locking carabiner hanging from it, and all our climbing gear was clipped onto it. It was heavy, probably 15 pounds or more. Anyone who has used climbing gear knows a carabiner does not just fall off. You have to press the gate in and lift it off. Somehow, that entire bundle had been removed from the shelf and dropped onto the floor. That scared Evan badly enough that he grabbed his gun and searched the whole house, convinced someone had broken in. Then he went outside to check around the building. As soon as the front door shut behind him, there were 3 loud knocks on the bedroom wall right above my head. That wall was the outside wall of the house. We were the end unit. There was nothing on the other side except open air. That was the moment Evan started to believe me. Soon after, we began hearing voices. At night, while we were lying in bed, we would hear a man and a woman talking in the corner of our room. Not clearly enough to understand every word, but clearly enough to hear the rhythm of conversation, back and forth, male voice, female voice. It sounded like listening to people talk through a closed door. I was so unnerved that I made Evan check the upper crawl space under the roof to make sure no one was living up there. I asked the neighbors if they heard anything strange, but they all looked at me like I was losing it. The woman next door lived alone, and there was no man in her house. Still, almost every night, those voices came from the corner of our bedroom. Then the night terrors started. I had never had sleep paralysis before, never had night terrors, but in that house, I would wake up screaming for help, screaming Evan's name, unable to move. One night, during one of those episodes, I saw a figure crawling over me. It was shaped like a man, dressed in black, but its limbs were too long. Its head looked like a boar or a pig. It started near my feet and crawled toward my face while I tried to scream. Right before it reached me, I woke up to Evan lunging across the bed. He said he had woken up and seen something crawling over my body. He was trying to shove it off me. I asked him to describe it. We had seen the same thing. After that, I started sleeping downstairs on the sofa, but it did not help. The voices continued. The lights continued. The strange knocks and moving objects continued. At one point, I became so desperate that I called a church to ask whether someone could come bless the house. While I was on the phone in my office, talking about bringing a priest over, every light in the room started flickering. During the time we lived there, everyone in the house got sick, even the animals. Our cat and dog started vomiting and having accidents indoors, which they had never done before. My cat was diagnosed with kidney disease. Evan got so ill, he needed surgery and dealt with terrible vertigo. My own autoimmune condition, which had been stable for years, flared worse than it had in nearly a decade. Maybe some of that was stress. I know that is possible. But I also know what that house felt like. Thankfully, after the first year, our lease went month to month, and we saved every bit we could until we were able to leave. Once we moved out, everything stopped. No more voices, no more lights, no more night terrors. I have never had sleep paralysis again. Evan recovered. My health settled. And the strangest part was my vet later told me my cat no longer showed signs of kidney disease. A while later, I met someone who worked in a building just a couple blocks from that townhouse. They told me their building had constant paranormal activity too, enough to turn them into a believer. I still think about that place sometimes. That old townhouse caught between the graveyard and the river. And honestly, I believe something about that location pulled things in. Or maybe it held on to them. I used to be really drawn to paranormal stuff when I was younger. I mean, genuinely fascinated by it. I watched all those ghost hunting shows, read about haunted places online, and spent way too much time looking for videos or photos that might prove something was out there. These days, I'm not quite the same. I've become more skeptical as I've gotten older, mostly because I haven't had many personal experiences in years. But there are still a few things from my past that I honestly don't know how to explain. The first one happened when I was little. I think I was around first or second grade. At the time, all the bedrooms in our house were upstairs. When you came up the stairs, my room was on the right, my sister Mia's room was right beside mine, and my mom's room was down the hall to the left. One afternoon, Mia had gotten some new posters, and she was putting them up in her room. I was just sitting there with her, hanging out, when this awful, uneasy feeling came over me. It felt like someone was watching me. I turned around and looked toward the stairs, and I saw what looked like a very tall figure wrapped in a big white sheet, slowly walking down the staircase. I just stood there and watched until it reached the bottom and disappeared from view. Then I ran straight to my mom's room, right as she was coming out, and I said, "Mom, did you see the lady?" Of course, she had no idea what I was talking about. I told her what I saw, and we checked the house, but there was nobody there. Something else happened in that same house, though I don't remember the exact day. I was upstairs, just outside my room, when I saw this strange, fuzzy black shape, maybe about the size of a rabbit, floating from one side of my room to the other. It vanished when it reached the wall. I checked the room on the other side, which was Mia's room, but there was nothing there. The next stretch of strange experiences happened when I was in high school, after my dad moved into a different house. There was just something about that place. I always felt uneasy there, especially when I was home alone or when everyone else was asleep. That was the period when the most things seemed to happen. Not huge, dramatic things, but little things that built up over time. Noises I couldn't place. Knocks on the walls. What sounded like footsteps in rooms where nobody should have been. It got to the point where I didn't want to sleep in a room by myself anymore. One night, I was sleeping in Mia's room. She was already asleep. My dad was asleep in his room, and I was still awake watching TV after midnight. Suddenly, I heard what sounded like someone running full speed up the stairs with heavy, heavy footsteps. My heart started pounding. The bedroom door was still open, but I was too scared to get up and close it. So I just turned toward the wall, pulled the blanket over my head, and stayed like that until I finally fell asleep. After that, I started sleeping downstairs on the couch. The couch was right underneath my old bedroom, and since I was a teenager, I usually stayed up pretty late. One night, around 3 in the morning, I heard footsteps directly above me, like someone walking around in that room. At first, I told myself it was probably Mia going to the bathroom. But the next day, I asked her about it, and she said she had gone to sleep before midnight and hadn't gotten up until morning. Another time, I was watching a movie with my family in a room where you could see the stairs in the upstairs bathroom. I looked up and saw what seemed like a little ball of light floating in the bathroom doorway. It stayed there for a few seconds, then disappeared. My dad's room also gave me a strange feeling. I don't know how else to describe it. Whenever I walked in there alone, I felt uncomfortable in a way I couldn't explain. The only other things that happened were 2 episodes of sleep paralysis. The first one happened when I had fallen asleep on the couch at my mom's house. In the dream, or whatever it was, several of my friends came into the house one by one and talked to me beside the couch. Then suddenly, everyone was gone. The house felt empty, and I couldn't move. I tried so hard to sit up or speak, but my body wouldn't respond. Then, all at once, I snapped out of it and sat straight up. The second time was much worse. I was asleep in my bed, and I thought I had woken up. I was staring at the ceiling when a dark, faceless figure slowly started moving over me, filling my vision. I could feel what seemed like 2 hands moving up my sides, and I was terrified. When everything went completely dark, I woke up with my heart pounding. Since that last sleep paralysis episode, nothing else has really happened to me. Now, part of me wonders if all of it was just an overactive imagination, especially because I was younger and so interested in paranormal things at the time. But another part of me still remembers how real those moments felt. And honestly, I still wonder why it all seemed to happen when I was young, then just stopped. I was in primary school at the time, around CM1 in France, and our class went on one of those school trips that everyone is expected to do at that age. We stayed in this little village up in the mountains, in a big old chalet-style building. It had 2 floors, maybe even a basement, though we were never allowed down there. The canteen was on the ground floor, and upstairs there were bedrooms, classrooms, and long corridors that felt a lot longer at night than they did during the day. At first, everything was honestly fine. I was excited to be away from home with my classmates. The mountains were beautiful, and during the day, nothing felt strange at all. But after a while, the rumors started. This was around the time when that creepy Momo picture was everywhere online, the one with the long dark hair and the strange, inhuman face. Some kids were saying she could haunt you, or contact you, or show up if you did certain things. I never really believed that. I saw the picture later, and it didn't leave me traumatized or anything. But because of Momo, scary stories started spreading around the group. Then some of the kids began talking about La Dame Blanche, the White Lady. I didn't really know the legend behind her. I just remember hearing that a few kids had played Bloody Mary in the bathroom and scared themselves badly, even though they tried to act brave afterward. After that, it became this silly joke for us to chant her name while walking to activities in broad daylight. I joined in sometimes, but I never had the courage to actually play anything like that for real. And honestly, I still didn't believe in it. At least, not until that night. My bedroom was on the second floor. I shared it with 4 other girls. They were sleeping in 2 bunk beds on the other side of the room, and I had my bed closer to a small window on my right. The window was tiny, maybe only a little bigger than a sheet of paper. I woke up during the night, and I saw her. She was standing near the window, or maybe coming from it. That's the part I still can't explain. It was as if she had formed out of the moonlight itself, like the pale light had gathered into the shape of a woman. I could see her silhouette clearly, but at the same time, I could see through her. She was draped in white, and her face kept turning slowly between me and the girls sleeping across the room. And then I realized everything had gone silent. Before that, I had been hearing the usual mountain sounds outside. Cows with bells, insects, little noises from the building. But suddenly, there was nothing. No crickets, no bells, no wind, no breathing from the other girls. Just silence. I wanted to cry, but I was too scared to move. I didn't want to blink. I didn't want to look away. I was terrified that if I stopped watching her, she would come closer. Her face was the worst part. Sometimes it looked completely pale, so pale that I couldn't make out her nose, eyes, or mouth unless she turned slightly to the side. But then, in the next moment, her eyes and mouth would seem darker, sharper, almost black. Not exactly angry, but deeply wrong. Like her features couldn't decide what shape they were supposed to have. I couldn't tell if she wanted to hurt us. I didn't feel hatred from her, not exactly, but I knew with my whole body that I didn't want her near me. And then, I started praying. I wasn't religious. I'm still not really. But in that moment, I remember thinking something like, "Dear God, if you exist, please show me you're here. Please make her leave us alone. I've been good. I need to see my parents again. The girls here are kind too, so please don't hurt us." I just kept begging in my head, over and over. She didn't disappear. She stayed there, half transparent in the moonlight, watching the room. At some point, I must have fallen asleep again, because I remember still seeing her as I drifted off. When I woke up in the morning, the sun was up, the room was normal, and she was gone. I never saw her again. For the rest of the trip, things mostly went back to normal, but I had a hard time sleeping after that. I kept staring at that little window, waiting for the light to change shape again. Within a couple of weeks, people stopped talking about the White Lady. The jokes faded, the rumors disappeared, and everyone moved on. But I kept wondering whether the games some kids had played had somehow brought something into our room that night. I tried to talk about it a little. A few other kids said they had seen her too, but none of us really went into detail. It was like we were all afraid that saying too much would make it real again. One of the adults on the trip told us later that he had gone around checking the bedrooms to make sure everyone was asleep. I think he was trying to reassure us, but I know what I saw. And whatever stood by that window that night, it wasn't him. I was still pretty young when this happened, not long after I came out of foster care. My family had just moved into this apartment complex called Elmdale Place in El Reno. It was one of those places that was actually affordable, and for me, my brother, and my two sisters, it felt like we finally had enough room to breathe. But almost right away, something about my bedroom felt wrong. Every night, after the lights went out, I would see these red eyes on the wall beside my closet. They didn't have a body, no shadow, no shape, no face, just two flat, red, glowing eyes, almost like they were being projected onto the wall. The strange part was, my room was completely dark. There wasn't any light coming in from outside, no nightlight, nothing, just darkness and those eyes. And they blinked. Not randomly either. They copied me. I remember testing it because, even as a kid, I was trying to make sense of it. I would blink one eye, then the other. I would wink in little patterns just to see what would happen, and those eyes would do it right back. My sisters saw them too, in their room. They had their own pairs of eyes, separate from mine. I never stayed in there long enough to find out if theirs copied them the same way, because honestly, I didn't want to know. There was also this small tree outside my window. It wasn't big enough to be scary on its own, but every time I stepped into my room, it would start tapping and banging against the glass. If I stepped back out, it stopped. I tested that too. I would walk in, it would start. I would walk out, it would stop. Over and over again. One night, I got so scared that I asked to sleep in my mom's room. We both walked to my doorway, and I just broke down crying. I pointed at the wall and told her I couldn't go get my blanket because the thing was staring at me. I begged her to grab it for me, but she wouldn't. I remember looking at her face and realizing she was scared too. She tried to hide it, but I could tell. She was uncomfortable, frozen almost. So I ran in myself, grabbed the blanket, and slammed the door behind me as I came back out. My mom's room never had the eyes. It was always totally dark in there. But it still felt awful, heavy, dreadful, like the darkness in that room had its own weight. I didn't understand that feeling as a kid, and honestly, I still don't fully understand it now. Back then, because I was so young and didn't know what else to call what I was seeing, I gave the eyes names. I called one Invisible Giraffe and the other Invisible Zebra. I know that sounds strange, but when you're little, your brain tries to make scary things feel less scary. About 6 months after we moved in, we came home one day and our bedrooms had been rearranged. My bed had been moved against the wall where the eyes used to appear. For the first week, I kept waiting for them to come back. I didn't trust that they were really gone. But they never showed up again. And that wasn't the only thing that changed. The tree stopped hitting my window. My sisters stopped seeing the eyes in their room too. It was like whatever had been there just vanished after the furniture was moved. Years later, when I was older, I started looking into the apartments. I found out that in 2009, a family had tragically died there in a really horrible way. I've never been able to stop connecting that to what I saw as a child. I don't know for sure what those eyes were. I don't know why they copied me, or why moving the beds seemed to make everything stop. But I know what I saw. It has stayed with me my whole life, tucked away in the back of my mind like a door I don't really want to open. Sometimes I think about going back, just to see if I can feel anything there again. But another part of me knows I probably shouldn't mess with something I don't understand. So I'm asking now, has anyone else ever seen red eyes watching them in the dark? Especially eyes that blinked when you blinked? because I would really love to know that me and my siblings aren't the only ones who experienced something like this. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, in one of those homes where family was always close. A lot of my relatives lived nearby, and some of my extended family were in and out of the house all the time. So, from the outside, you'd think I would have felt safe. But at night, I never did. There was always this feeling, like something was waiting somewhere in the dark. I couldn't explain it then, and honestly, I still can't explain it now. I just knew I couldn't sleep alone. I had to crawl into someone's bed or ask somebody to stay with me, because even with a house full of family, I felt like I wasn't really protected. One of my earliest memories is from when I was around 5. I was sitting on the floor playing Mario on the old Nintendo. We were getting the carpet replaced, so the floors were bare, with old tile marks and sticky patches left behind. I remember hearing my mom call my name. Not once, a few times. Her bedroom was right across the hall, so I got up, went over, and asked her what she needed. She looked confused and said, "I didn't call you, baby." And that was it. I went right back to my game. At that age, I didn't really sit there and think, "That's strange." But it stayed with me. Out of everything from my childhood, that little moment is still sharp in my mind. My grandpa Harold was deeply religious. He had worked as a roofer for over 40 years before retiring. He'd come up to Chicago from West Virginia and bought that house back when my mom and her brothers and sisters were kids, sometime in the 60s. So the place had history. It was a family house, the kind with old stories tucked into the walls. And I'd heard some of those stories from my older relatives. But I didn't really believe them. You know how it is. Somebody tells you something strange happened, and your mind immediately starts building escape routes. Maybe it was the pipes. Maybe it was a dream. Maybe someone was playing a prank. I did that with their stories, and I've tried to do that with mine too. But some things don't give you enough room to explain them away. One night, I was sleeping in my mother's bed when something woke me up. I sat straight up so suddenly that it woke her too. She asked me what was wrong, and I told her, "Grandma said goodbye." That was all I said. My grandmother usually made breakfast for everyone on the weekends, but that morning she didn't come down. We waited for a while. I don't know why. Maybe everyone was hoping she was just tired. Maybe nobody wanted to be the first person to say what they were afraid of. Eventually, they found her. She had passed away in her sleep from a massive heart attack. My mom asked me about that moment many times over the years, but I never had much more to give her. I don't remember a full dream. I don't remember seeing my grandmother standing there or hearing a long message. I only remember waking up, sitting straight up in bed, and saying, "Grandma said goodbye." Sometime after that, I was scared one night and went looking for somewhere to sleep. I ended up crawling into my grandpa's bed. His room always felt heavy, but not in a bad way at first. It was full of religious pictures and statues. Jesus, Mary, saints everywhere. He had Bibles stacked around, different versions, and a bunch of books too, mostly old thrillers and worn paperbacks. He was a devout Catholic, the kind of man who opened the local church every morning. He helped set things up, prayed at the altar, and people trusted him with the keys because he never missed a day. So, in my mind, his room should have been the safest place in the house. But that night, I woke up, and I felt this pull toward the closet. That's the only way I can describe it. It wasn't curiosity. It didn't feel like my own idea. It was more like something inside me had been tugged by a string, and I had to look. So I did. My eyes had already adjusted to the dark, so I could make out the shape of the room. The dresser, the walls, the door. But the closet was different. It was black. Not regular darkness, not shadows. It looked like a hole had opened in the room, and inside that blackness were two red eyes. They weren't glowing exactly, but they were there, blurry around the edges, a little slanted, floating almost. I couldn't tell what they were looking at. They didn't even seem fixed on me. They were just hanging there in that dark, staring into nothing. I felt all the fear hit me at once. I laid back down, squeezed my eyes shut, and didn't move. I didn't scream. I didn't wake anyone. I just froze there under the blankets until eventually, somehow, I fell asleep again. The part that still bothers me most is what happened later. When I woke up, the house was empty. Everyone was gone. So whatever that was, I had slept in that room with it for who knows how long, completely alone. And that thought scares me even more than seeing the eyes. Years later, my mom told me she had her own experiences in that house growing up. The one I remember most is her saying something grabbed her through the wall while she was sleeping. She didn't talk about it dramatically. She said it so casually that I almost convinced myself it had to be some sibling prank or half-asleep confusion. That's what I always tried to do, find the reasonable explanation. But some rooms in that house never felt reasonable. My sister's room was one of them. I hated being in there. It always felt like something was watching from a corner you couldn't quite see. I never slept in that room, not once. And even now, when I think back on that house, I don't remember it as just a childhood home. I remember it as a place that held its breath at night. I want to tell you about my great-grandmother, Lillian. She was one of those people who seemed to carry softness with her, even after life had given her more than enough reasons to become hard. She had been through so much, but somehow, love was still the thing she led with. She painted beautifully, she loved getting lost in books, and when I was little, I always remembered her wearing this bright yellow nightgown with tiny pink flowers on it. It was cheerful and ridiculous in the sweetest way, and to me, it was just her. She lived out in Colorado, and we lived in Georgia, so I only saw her every few years. In 2011, we made a long trip to visit her, but something felt different that time. I was young, so I didn't really understand what was happening. I didn't understand why she wouldn't look at me the way she used to, or why she was staying somewhere unfamiliar, or why she wasn't in that yellow nightgown showing me her paintings. A few days after we got home, she passed away from dementia. Watching what that illness did to her was one of the hardest things I've ever had to witness. Afterward, her son began going through her belongings and sending us the things she had left behind. I received her old art box, still full of unfinished paintings, and a jewelry box she had owned since she was a girl. At the time, I had no idea how much those things would come to mean to me. For a few months, nothing really happened. We were just grieving. Then her ashes were delivered to our house. Her son couldn't bear to keep them, and he said he felt like she needed to be with us. So my mom placed the urn on a large bookshelf in our living room, tucked behind some of Lillian's favorite books. That night, after I had finally unpacked her jewelry box and looked through her art, I had a dream about her. In the dream, it was Christmas morning. My mom was in the kitchen making breakfast. My brother and I were playing with new toys, and my great-grandmother was there with us, calm and familiar, like she had never left. At one point, she went upstairs to get something. Then I woke up because I felt a hand touch my leg. It was warm, not frightening at all. It felt like someone had sat gently at the end of my bed and rested their hand there, just to comfort me. The next morning, I told my mom right away. Before I could even finish, she started crying. She told me that earlier that morning, while she was making breakfast, she saw a blur of yellow and pink rush up the stairs. We both knew what that meant. The nightgown. A few weeks later, my brother was having friends over for a sleepover. The night before, my mom had a dream about Lillian too. In the dream, they were arguing. My mom couldn't remember what the argument was about, but she woke up crying. That morning, she came into my room to wake me up so I could help clean. As we walked downstairs, we stopped cold. There were books scattered all over the floor in front of the bookshelf. But not just any books. Only the books that had been sitting directly in front of Lillian's ashes. Her favorite ones. They weren't just tipped over either. They were a few feet away from the shelf. Nothing else had moved. Not the other books, not the urn, not even the dust nearby. We had a cat, but there was no way the cat could have caused that kind of mess so precisely. We just stood there, staring. Then, while we were putting the books back, we heard music upstairs. It was coming from my room. From the jewelry box. The strange thing is, I didn't even know it played music. I had opened it before, turned it around, tried the little crank, even tapped it gently, but it had never made a sound. And there it was, playing on its own. Months later, my mom, my brother, and I took a trip to Florida. We were going to see family and spend time at the beach, but before we left, my mom brought Lillian's ashes with us. Her husband, my great-grandfather, was buried in a family cemetery there, and my mom wanted to bury some of her ashes with him so they could be together again. The day we drove to the cemetery, it rained heavily the entire way. For almost an hour, it just poured. But the moment we reached the cemetery entrance, the rain stopped. The sun came out like nothing had happened. We walked around for a while, cleaned the area, and let ourselves feel everything we had been carrying. Eventually, I went back to the car, got the urn, and placed it on my great-grandfather's grave. And this is the part I struggled to believe myself for a long time. When I set the urn down, I sat beside it, and everything around me seemed to soften. I didn't pass out exactly. I was still awake, but I felt far away, almost like I had slipped into another room without moving. I started hearing voices, faint at first, then clearer. Then I saw them. My great-grandmother and my great-grandfather were standing together in front of an old wooden window. There was a red curtain moving lightly in the breeze. They were laughing and crying at the same time, talking like two people who had been apart for years and finally had all the time in the world to catch up. I couldn't understand every word, but I could feel what it was. Relief. Love. Home. Then Lillian turned and looked at me. I stood up immediately, picked up the urn, and walked back toward the car. My mom kept asking me what was wrong, but all I could say was, "She's ready to leave." As soon as I got into the car, I passed out. When I came to, my mom and brother were shaking me, terrified. I told my mom what I had seen. I described the window, the curtain, and my great-grandfather. She broke down crying. I had never met him. He died before I was born. And the house I described had burned down decades earlier. There were no pictures of it that I had ever seen, but my mom said I described it exactly. When we drove out of the cemetery gates, the rain started again, heavy and sudden, all the way back to the hotel. Now, I know Florida weather can be dramatic. Rain there has a flair for entrances, but the timing of it stayed with us. After that, years went by and nothing really happened. We still felt like Lillian was with us, but in a quieter way. Not moving books or playing music, just present, loved, peaceful. Then Christmas of 2020 came. My grandfather, her son, visited us for the holiday. He stayed in my room for the week, and we spent time talking about his mother. We showed him her paintings hanging around the house, remembered her stories, and just held on to the good parts. When it was time for him to leave, my mom and brother drove him to the airport, and I stayed home alone. The house was completely quiet. Then I heard it. The jewelry box started playing. I called my mom right away and told her to put me on speaker because I had something I needed my grandfather to hear before he got on the plane. I held the phone up to the jewelry box and let it play. When the music stopped, I told him, "That was your mom's jewelry box. It hasn't made a sound in years, not until today. And honestly, I think that was her way of saying goodbye. Or maybe not goodbye. Maybe just, I'm still here. I heard you. I love you." I'm still trying to make sense of something that happened to me earlier today, and honestly, it has stayed with me in a way I can't quite explain. I was sitting in a park in London, right by this small pond, just taking in the kind of sunshine we don't get very often. There were people around, nothing unusual happening, just a normal afternoon. While I was sitting there, I came across a comment under a video about love. It said, "Don't fall in love with the love you give. Fall in love with the love you receive." And for some reason, that hit me hard. I've been going through something with a girl lately, and that quote felt almost too close to what I've been feeling. So I screenshotted it and sat there with it for a moment. Then, maybe 2 or 3 minutes later, a woman walked up to me. She was probably in her late 30s or early 40s, not very tall, with short light brown hair. She had on a dark olive top, a black skirt, sunglasses, and she was carrying a small handbag. She stopped near me and said, "Hi." At first, I wasn't even sure she was speaking to me, so I didn't answer right away. Then she sat down beside me on the bench and said, "Can I ask you something?" I said, "Sure." She had a soft accent, maybe Australian, maybe New Zealand. I couldn't quite place it. Then she looked straight at me and asked, "What do you think love really is?" I didn't know what to say. I mean, I had literally just been thinking about love. I had just saved that quote. And now this complete stranger was sitting beside me, asking me the exact kind of question that was already circling around in my head. Then she took off her sunglasses. She had pale green eyes, and there was something slightly unusual about the way she looked at me. Her eyes didn't focus in the same direction, and I'll be honest, it startled me a little. Not because I wanted to judge her, but because the whole moment already felt strange, and that detail made it feel even more unreal. I remember sitting there, trying to stay calm, but inside I was nervous. My thoughts were racing. Was she flirting with me? Was she doing some kind of social experiment? Was there a camera somewhere? Was this for TikTok or YouTube? But my mind just went completely blank. So all I could say was, "Sorry, I don't know." She didn't seem disappointed. She just gave me this gentle look and said, "That's okay. I just wanted to tell you that everything is going to be all right, and you're not alone." Then she stood up, put her sunglasses back on, and walked away quickly, back in the same direction she had come from. She went down a path that led toward a wooded area. And I just sat there. I must have stayed on that bench for at least 10 minutes, trying to understand what had just happened. I looked around for cameras. I looked to see if anyone nearby had reacted. But everyone was just going about their day. Nobody seemed to notice anything unusual at all. Eventually, I got up and walked down the same path she had taken. Part of me wanted to find her, just to see if she was with someone, or if there was a camera crew nearby, or anything that would explain it. But I couldn't find her. That's what makes this so strange to me. A random woman came up to me and asked about love just minutes after I had been sitting there thinking about love. She didn't seem to speak to anyone else. She didn't go around asking other people questions. If it was a survey or a project, surely she would have approached more than just me. If it was some kind of prank video, it was the quietest, most uneventful prank in the world. And the fact that she came from one direction, spoke only to me, gave me that message, and then went straight back the way she came, made it feel almost intentional. Like she had come there for that exact moment. I know how that sounds. I'm usually skeptical about things like this. I don't jump straight to supernatural explanations. But this didn't feel normal. It didn't feel random either. The words she said affected me more than I expected. A few years ago, I lost my father, and when she said, "You're not alone," something in me shifted. It made me wonder whether the message was about him, or whether it was about the girl I've been struggling over. Or maybe it was just a stranger who somehow said exactly what I needed to hear at exactly the right time. I don't know who she was. Maybe she was just a woman having her own kind of difficult day. Maybe she was deeply intuitive. Maybe she had mental health struggles. Maybe it was coincidence. Or maybe, in some way I can't explain, she was meant to cross my path. But I can't shake the feeling that there was something different about that encounter. I keep replaying it in my mind. Her voice, the question, the timing, the way she left. And honestly, I still don't know what to make of it. I guess the best place to start is by saying that I've always had shadow people, spirits, or whatever you want to call them around me. I've lived in 3 different houses, and something happened in every single one. The first house, I'll call it House Elm, was where it started. I was really young there, and honestly, I was going through a lot of the time. For years, I told myself I probably imagined most of it, or that maybe I was just being dramatic because I was a kid. But I remember hearing people when no one was there. Sometimes animals too. I'd see shadowy figures, and my bedroom door or closet door would open and close on their own. My mom remembers things I don't even fully remember. She says I used to stand in one specific corner of the room, talking to empty air. Sometimes I'd hug the air there too, like someone was standing right in front of me. What I do remember clearly is the feeling, that heavy, stomach-sinking dread that came from that corner and from my closet. It felt wrong, even before I had words for it. When I was a little older, I went to a sleepover, and because we were teenagers and thought we were untouchable, we messed with a Ouija board. Whatever came through said it knew one of us and called itself V. After that, things at home got worse. Electronics would turn on and off by themselves. Objects would fall for no reason. Things disappeared and later turned up in places that made absolutely no sense. We lived in House Elm for around 9 years. The second house, I'll call House Laurel. That's where the shadow people became more frequent. I heard voices a few times too. Eventually, I got tired of being scared and started talking back whenever something happened. And it seemed to respond. Things kept moving, but now it would happen right in front of us. My mom's phone got thrown off flat surfaces more than once. Doors slammed. Lights acted strange. It started bothering the dogs too, which bothered me more than anything it did to me. Around that time, I started learning more about Norse paganism and experimenting with witchcraft. I saged the house often with lavender bundles, burned incense, made protection jars, and did quite a few protection spells. That was also around the time my mom really started believing something was going on. There was one room in that house that gave me that same bone-deep fear I remembered from childhood, but nothing especially dramatic happened in there. The rest of the activity was mostly doors opening and closing, lights flickering, things going missing, or stuff being tossed around. Sometimes I felt like a hand grabbed me. Sometimes I heard whispers right next to my ear. But after a while, the fear faded. I got used to it. I talked to it like it was some strange, annoying roommate no one had invited, but everyone had learned to live with. We stayed there about 5 years and moved out right before my senior year of high school. Now we're in our third house, where we've lived for about 3 years. At first, everything quieted down. I cleansed this house heavily with lavender, burned incense often, and kept up with the same protections I'd used before. But eventually, the activity came back. I talk to it more now, whatever it is. I sometimes call it our little traveling house spirit, because it honestly feels like it followed us from place to place. And it does seem to acknowledge me. There's one specific light it loves to mess with. We've changed the bulb probably 7 times. My dad checked the wiring. There's no obvious reason for it. But when I tell it to stop, it usually does. Usually. Sometimes it starts back up like it's testing me. My mom has started seeing shadow figures upstairs, or hearing someone moving around when she's home alone, and both dogs are right there in sight. It seems mostly focused on me though, probably because I'm the one who talks to it the most. About 30 minutes before I started writing this, something got thrown across my room pretty aggressively. My room is honestly a disaster right now because I've got about 5 different craft projects spread across the floor, so I couldn't even figure out what went flying. My back was turned, but I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. Whatever it was went behind a bookshelf and moved the curtain. Then I heard something hit a stand nearby. I tried to look around without knocking into my projects or disturbing my altars, since they're over on that side of the room, but I couldn't see what had moved. So I took a break and went to the bathroom. When I came back, my oddity cabinet was open. That cabinet has a pretty secure lock. There's nothing inside it right now, and nothing nearby could have knocked it open. It was just open. My partner thinks it might be Loki, but I really don't feel like it is. I do work with Norse gods, specifically Freya and Loki, but this feels different. It feels more paranormal than divine. I'm not afraid of it, and I don't really want to get rid of it. I'm mostly just curious about what it could be. It might also be worth mentioning that I sometimes have lucid dreams involving angry or vengeful spirits. I've always felt watched too, though part of that could just be anxiety from other things I've been through. When whatever this is starts messing with me or the dogs, I speak to it pretty sternly. Not always politely either. I'll say things like, "Can we not do this today?" Or, "What are we doing right now?" Or, "Give back the thing you took." And weirdly enough, that usually works. So I'm wondering what this could be. Something attached to me? Something attached to my family? A house spirit that decided to follow us? I don't know. I'm not Christian, and I'm not looking for advice about turning to anyone's God. I believe in all gods, but I have my own path and my own practice. Mostly, I just want to understand what has been walking beside me all these years. I want to tell you about one of the eeriest stories to come out of Turkey, and what makes it so unsettling is that people there have about it for generations. This isn't some made-up internet legend. It's tied to a real place, the Hifzibay Mansion, a building many people came to call Paraly Kushk, or the Haunted Mansion. The story starts in the early 1900s, around 1908. The owner was a powerful man named Yusuf Zeki Pasha. According to local accounts, he was deeply obsessed with his much younger wife. People said his love for her had turned possessive, even unhealthy. So he had this towering mansion built almost like a private prison, keeping her shut away in one upper section of the house, far from strangers, far from the city, far from ordinary life. That alone would have been tragic enough. But what really gave the mansion its dark reputation happened after he died in 1925. His last request was what shocked people most. He wanted his tomb in Egypt to be made with the very same red bricks taken from the part of the mansion where his wife had lived in isolation. It was as if he wanted to carry that obsession with him beyond death, to remain surrounded by the walls that had held her. After that, the mansion stood unfinished and abandoned for decades, just looming there over the Bosphorus like a memory no one wanted to touch. And over the years, the stories began to build. People living nearby claimed they would sometimes see a woman standing in the windows at night. Long hair, pale figure, moving slowly from room to room, even though the building was supposed to be completely empty. Then, during restoration work many years later, workers started sharing their own stories. Some said they saw a woman in outdated clothing reflected in mirrors behind them, only to turn around and find no one there. A few of them were so shaken they refused to go into certain rooms by themselves. There were also reports of music, especially late at night. Not loud, not clear, just the faint sound of piano notes drifting through the hollow structure. The strange part was simple. There wasn't even a piano inside the building. And one of the most disturbing discoveries came during the renovation itself, when hidden underground levels were reportedly found beneath the mansion, floors that didn't seem to appear in the plans people thought they knew. That only deepened the mystery, because suddenly the place felt even less understood than before. Today, the mansion has been restored and put to use, but the stories never really disappeared. Even now, some people say that if you look up at the tower from a boat on the Bosphorus after dark, you might still catch sight of her. A woman standing there, waiting silently at the window. Maybe it's just legend layered over history. Maybe it's the emotional weight of what happened there. Or maybe some places really do hold on to the people and feelings trapped inside them. Either way, that mansion still carries a heaviness people haven't forgotten. So this happened in an old house we had in Indiana, and I'm not the only one who remembers strange things happening there. My family could back up plenty of these stories, but this one has always stayed with me. One afternoon, I was downstairs in the basement, trying to get through a workout, when my son Trent came down with his cousin Abby. They were around 8 or 9 then, full of energy, loud, playful, and definitely not interested in letting me exercise in peace. They were tearing around the basement, laughing and carrying on, and finally I told them, "All right, enough. Go back upstairs and let me finish." They said they were going to play hide and seek, and I told them that was fine, as long as they stayed out of the basement. So they ran back upstairs, and I went back to what I was doing. A couple minutes later, I heard footsteps on the basement stairs again. I turned, expecting one of them to be sneaking back down, and I saw Abby. She came hurrying into the basement like she was looking for a place to hide. Without saying a word, she slipped behind a door and crouched there. Not long after that, Trent came downstairs too, but this time he was whispering. He asked me, "Have you seen Abby?" I remember feeling annoyed because I thought they were both ignoring me and turning this into part of their game. I motioned toward the door where I had just seen her hide and said something like, "Yes, and I'm getting tired of you two coming down here." Trent went straight to the door and pulled it open. There was nobody there. I can still remember the way that felt. My whole body just went cold because I knew what I had seen. At that point, I stopped working out completely, and Trent and I searched the basement together. We checked everywhere. Abby was nowhere downstairs. I started calling for her, honestly, panicking a little by then, and she answered me from upstairs. She had been up there the entire time. I went up right away and asked her if she had come down to the basement and hidden behind that door. She looked at me completely confused and said no. She had never come downstairs at all. And I believed her, because there was no way she could have gotten back upstairs without us seeing her. When I explained what I'd seen, the look on her face changed. First confusion, then fear. She understood exactly why it shook me. The truth is, that house had a reputation with all of us. Almost anyone who spent enough time there knew something wasn't right. There were certain places in the house where the atmosphere felt heavy, where odd things happened more often, and the basement was definitely one of them. Needless to say, we all stayed upstairs after that. Nobody wanted to go back down there for the rest of the day. And that was just one story. There were many others, some that happened to me, some told by relatives, all centered around that same house. I never really knew why it felt haunted. There was talk about a woman who had lived there before us and passed away in the home. I didn't know much about her, only that she was deeply religious. Whatever was in that house, it never felt like just one presence. It felt like many. Some of them seemed mischievous, almost playful in a cruel way. Others felt darker. People saw shadows. Some swore they saw figures that looked completely real. I never saw one fully clear with my own eyes, but I heard enough from people I trust to know they believed what they saw. So when I tell you, I saw Abby run into that basement and hide behind that door, I mean I saw her. The only problem is, she was never there. When I was about 9, my mom and I moved out to my grandmother's horse ranch, and that's where everything started. Even now, my mom says one of the biggest mistakes she ever made was giving me the upstairs room on the left side of the house instead of the one across the hall. There was this little walk-in attic connected to my room, and from the beginning, she said it just didn't feel right in there. She couldn't really explain it. It just gave her a bad feeling. At first, nothing seemed too strange, but at night, if everything was really quiet, I'd hear what sounded like a baby crying. Faint. So faint that I kept telling myself it had to be coming from outside somewhere. The next morning, I asked my grandmother about it, and she told me maybe it was goats from a nearby property. That sounded reasonable enough, so I tried not to think too much about it. But after a while, little things started happening. I'd come home from school, and my radio would be playing a completely different station from the one I'd left it on. I asked everyone in the house if they'd gone into my room, and every single one of them said, no. Then my bedside lamp started turning on by itself. I'd wake up in the morning and find it glowing, with no memory of switching it on the night before. What really got to me, though, was that attic door. It started cracking open on its own at random times, even when no one had been in my room. I got so scared of it that my grandfather finally put a lock on the door, just to help me feel better. I remember being relieved, but only a little, because deep down, I felt like the lock wasn't really the point. It was whatever was behind that door, or maybe around it, that bothered me. Then one morning, my grandmother was standing at the kitchen window, staring out toward the pasture. She called me over and told me to look. My grandfather was out in the field carrying a bucket of water, and he was talking like someone was walking right beside him. When he came back in, my grandmother asked him who he'd been talking to, and without even hesitating, he said, "Mr. Larkin." Just plain as day, like it was the most normal answer in the world. Then he stopped, blinked, and kind of laughed it off. He said he could have sworn there'd been a man walking with him, even though he knew that sounded ridiculous. Not long after that, we learned more about the land itself. There was a pasture where the mares used to gather under the only tree in the field. Over time, they'd kicked up so much dirt around it that old headstones started showing through the ground. That's how we found out the property had once had a family cemetery on it, long before the ranch was sold. Two of the graves were women who had died during childbirth. And then there was the old barn across the road. We later learned that decades earlier, a man had taken his own life there. So by then, all those strange little things didn't feel so little anymore. One morning on the school bus, something happened that I still think about all the time. Usually I was the first one picked up and the last one dropped off, but that day the route had changed, so there was already another kid on the bus when I got on. He waved me over and told me to sit with him. Almost immediately, he said his family used to live on our property. We talked about it for a minute, and then he got quiet. He looked at me and asked, "What room do you have?" I told him, and I will never forget the way his face changed. He looked down for a second, then back at me, and said, "Does anything happen in that room?" Even now, telling that story gives me chills. I want to tell you something that's been passed down in my family for years. It happened to my grandmother when she was still a young woman, and it's one of those stories that never changed, no matter who told it. I heard it from her myself more than once, and my mother told it the exact same way. Back then, my grandmother, her name was Mara, was in her early 30s, living in a small village with her two little children. One evening, they were on their way home from the fields in an old wooden cart pulled by a pair of oxen. It had gotten later than she meant to stay out, and the light was fading fast. Since the children were sleepy and worn out, she decided to take the quicker path back, the one that ran beside the cemetery. As they got close to it, the oxen suddenly stopped. Not slowed down, stopped completely. She tried calling to them, urging them forward, even tugging at them, but they wouldn't budge. Not one step forward, not one step back. She always said the animals were trembling, slick with sweat, breathing so hard it frightened her. It was like they were panicking over something she couldn't see, yet somehow they were frozen in place. That was when fear really set in. So she started praying, quietly at first, then more earnestly. Just the prayers she knew by heart, the ones that came to her in that moment. And the second she finished, the oxen lurched forward. But they didn't just start walking again. They bolted. They ran as if something behind them had broken loose and was chasing them. Then one of the children, my mother's brother, who was just a little boy then, started crying and shouting. He kept pointing behind the cart, terrified, saying there was someone there. He said it was a bald man following them. My grandmother turned to look, and she always said she saw something too. She described it as small and oddly shaped, with a face that didn't seem right. Not exactly human, not exactly anything she could explain. Just something that felt wrong the moment she saw it. She didn't stop the cart. She didn't look back again. She just held on to the children and let the oxen run until they reached home. What always stayed with me is that she never told this story to scare anyone. She never dressed it up or tried to make it sound bigger than it was. She simply said that was what happened that night, and from then on, she never took that cemetery road again. In our family, nobody has ever claimed to know what she saw. We've only ever said the same thing. Something strange happened out there that night. And honestly, I still wonder whether other families have stories like this too, about cemeteries, animals suddenly freezing, or old encounters that were never really explained. Last winter, I was staying at a friend's farmhouse with a small group of close friends. We had lit a fire out in the courtyard, and as the night settled in, we started swapping stories about jinn, strange encounters, and all the things people whisper about after dark. Right in the middle of it, the old caretaker came out and told us dinner was ready. My friend smiled and said, "We'll come in soon." But I stopped him and said to the caretaker, "Why don't you sit with us for a while? We're telling jinn stories, and I'm sure you must know a few." He gave a quiet smile, nodded, and said, "Oh, I know plenty." So after dinner, we asked him to come back and join us by the fire. He settled down, looked into the flames for a moment, and then began. He said, "Back in my village, there was a large house owned by a wealthy family. They had one daughter, Samira. She was strong-willed, the kind of girl who liked doing exactly what she was told not to do. Her mother always warned her not to go up to the roof around sunset, but she never listened. Right beside their house was an abandoned piece of land, overgrown with thick wild trees and bushes. People in the area used to say that place carried a bad feeling." He paused, then continued. "One evening, at a very unusual hour, Samira bathed and then went up to the roof. A little while later, her mother realized she was nowhere to be found. Then, suddenly, there was a loud crashing sound from the empty plot next door. Two neighbors rushed over and shouted that the girl had fallen from the roof. She was badly injured. They took her to the hospital. The doctors said there was a small fracture near her knee and that she would need proper rest. But when she returned home, something about her had changed. She became withdrawn, quiet, not like herself at all." He leaned in a little closer. "Her mother had diabetes, so she woke at nearly the same hour every night. One night, when she got up, she found Samira standing motionless in the dark, staring out toward the wild trees. When her mother gently touched her shoulder, the girl jerked in surprise and said, 'How did I get here?' At first, the family thought she was just traumatized from the fall. But then her grandmother came to visit and started talking about the wedding that was supposed to happen soon. Samira looked at her in a way that made everyone uncomfortable. Then, in a voice that didn't sound like hers at all, heavy and rough, she said, 'What did you say, old woman?' After that, she made this deep growling sound and said, 'I am the one from the empty land. That day, I pulled her to me. She will never marry. I have taken her.' He shook his head slowly. The whole family heard it. Fear spread through the room. No one could move. They said the air itself felt cold. That was the moment they became convinced that something unnatural had taken hold of her. After that, she would let her hair loose, whip her head around wildly, stare with huge eyes, and laugh in this sharp, chilling way. And you know how small towns are. News spreads before the day is over. Soon, everyone was saying the girl was possessed. The man she was engaged to also heard about it. His family came to see for themselves. The moment Samira saw him, she burst into laughter and said in that same deep voice, "You? You still want to marry her?" Then she snapped her fingers and said, "I'll send you somewhere you'll never return from." The poor man fled. He sighed before going on. Then one day, a man from a nearby town appeared at their door. He said he had heard about the girl and believed he could cure her. At first, the family wanted nothing to do with him and tried to shut the door. But he stopped them and said, "At least let me try." They were exhausted by then, desperate and worn down, so they agreed to listen. But the man had one condition. The caretaker looked around at us before continuing. He said, "My treatment will only work if you promise to marry your daughter to me." We all went silent. He said, "Of course the family was furious. Who asks for something like that?" But the man kept talking. He said, "Think carefully. The whole town knows about her condition now. Who else will marry her? I'll cure her and I'll marry her. This isn't even my profession. I have a regular job. This is simply knowledge I have." The family struggled with it, but they felt trapped. No respected family would now agree to marry their son to her. Under normal circumstances, they would never even have considered this man. But helpless people often agree to things they would once have rejected. In the end, they said yes. He made an arrangement with them. Half the treatment before the wedding, the rest after. And strangely enough, Samira did begin to improve. The growling stopped. She spoke more normally, though sometimes she would still laugh for no reason. The man told them, "That too will disappear after marriage." And so they were married. He looked down at his hands. For nearly 2 years, everything seemed peaceful. It looked as if she had truly been healed. Then one day, she came to visit her parents. I happened to be there, doing some work outside. By chance, I overheard her speaking softly to her husband. The fire crackled while he spoke. She was laughing under her breath and said, "Do you remember our plan? I really did fall and injure myself, yes. But the sounds, the wide eyes, the frightening expressions, the deep voice saying the jinn from the empty land had claimed me. That was all an act. Every bit of it." No one around the fire said a word. The caretaker continued, more quietly now. When her family found out, they were devastated, completely shattered. They realized they had been fooled by their own daughter. For years, they had lived under the weight of gossip and pity. They had spent their savings on fake healers and false hope. And all along, she never once stopped to think about what it was costing them, not just in money, but in dignity, in heartbreak, in shame. He sighed deeply. In the end, they disowned her. They told her never to return. The marriage she wanted so badly ended up costing her the family she was born into. Then he looked at us and said, "That's the story. And the lesson is this: not every frightening thing is a jinn story. Sometimes it's deception. Sometimes the people who claim they can help only want your money. And sometimes the real darkness comes from the lie of someone you trust." Then, after a pause, he added in a softer voice, "And if someone is truly suffering, may God guide them to sincere healers. People whose work is for the good of others, not for greed. People whose actions show honesty and purity, and who seek healing with God's help. Amen." You know, I've told this story a few times, but every time I do, I still get that same uneasy feeling. My dad bought this old building back in 2009. It was this sturdy 2-story sandstone place with a lot of history packed into it. Over the years, it had been an inn, a gas station, a little cafe, and at one point, the owners even lived upstairs. Dad used the downstairs for his business and kept a few trailers parked out front. Not long after he got it, I started hearing stories about the place. One that stuck with me was about a man who'd lived there decades earlier, back when the building was in its restaurant phase. People in town had apparently treated him horribly after he was outed, and not long after that, he took his own life. I never knew how much of that story was true, but it stayed in the back of my mind. Upstairs had been renovated before we moved in. It was basically one giant open room, the kind of space that had to be a bedroom, living room, and dining room all at once. Off to one side, there was a bathroom and this tiny, cramped kitchen, and on the far end, my brother and I had our own little area. We moved in around 2011. Dad worked downstairs every day, and for the most part, life there felt normal. I mean, sure, sometimes the place gave me the creeps for no reason I could explain, but nothing dramatic happened to me as a kid. The one thing I do remember was what happened to my mom. One night, she woke up completely frozen, totally aware but unable to move. She said it felt like something heavy and dark was pressing down on her chest, like the room itself had turned wrong somehow. She couldn't breathe properly until it finally passed. A few years later, around 2014, we moved into a regular house, but Dad still had his shop downstairs, and I worked with him there. One afternoon, I got ridiculously tired and decided to go upstairs to nap. My parents had left an old mattress there, so I just dropped down on it face first and passed out. When I woke up, all 4 of my limbs were stretched out, like I'd been pinned into place. I couldn't move. It was sleep paralysis, but worse than anything I'd ever heard described. I could feel pressure on my wrists and ankles, and there was this strange tingling all through my body as I started coming to. Then I heard this faint chanting right behind my head. Not English, not anything I recognized, just soft and rhythmic and wrong. When it finally let go, I didn't jump up screaming or anything. I just lay there, staring around the room, trying to act calm while feeling absolutely rattled. Then I got up and left. That was the last time I ever took a nap there alone. Later on, a friend of mine, Ophelia, moved in for a while because she needed a place to stay. She used to say, flat out, "This place is haunted." She didn't really have a big dramatic story to go with it, just a deep certainty. Mostly she talked about the atmosphere, how heavy and uncomfortable it felt. I told her about what I'd experienced, and she stayed about a year before moving on for unrelated reasons. Then, around 2017, my uncle moved in. He'd come up from Texas after his marriage fell apart and his business collapsed. He started working for my dad too, and honestly, that whole stretch of time was rough. He was carrying a lot, and you could feel it. Eventually, he took his own life. I remember going to the apartment after reading the goodbye post he left online, and the whole place felt darker than I'd ever felt it before. His laptop was still sitting on the table with some medical diagram of the heart on the screen. He had gone out to the side of the highway several miles away and shot himself there. That memory stayed with me in a way I can't really explain. It felt like the apartment absorbed every tragedy that touched it. Mine was vivid and awful. A man walked into the local grocery store and shot himself right in front of me. Sadie's was different, but just as disturbing. In hers, she was trying to talk to her mom, but her mom couldn't hear her. Then in the dream, she realized she had died and was the one haunting the room. We woke up and told each other what we'd dreamed, and it shook us both. We tried to reason it out. Maybe it was just suggestion. Maybe we already knew too much about the place. But still, it was unsettling. Not long after that, we adopted a cat and named her Lady. Within days, she made it very clear there was one particular part of that apartment she did not trust. It was this open closet area in the corner near the bathroom door. The first time we really noticed it, Sadie and I were both in the bathroom when Lady trotted over to the doorway, looked sharply into that corner, and froze. Her whole body puffed up. She turned sideways like cats do when they're terrified, and just stood there absolutely locked in. Sadie and I didn't say a word. We just looked at her, then at each other. And it kept happening, over and over. That same corner. She was fascinated by it, but also terrified of it. And honestly, once we started noticing her reactions, we got scared of it too. The apartment already felt off in general, even in broad daylight, but that corner felt especially wrong. One morning, while I was still asleep, Sadie got up to use the bathroom. While she was in there, Lady let out this scream from just outside the door. Not a yowl, not a hiss, not a regular cat noise. Sadie said it sounded horrific, like an animal in absolute panic. Her first thought was that Lady must have been badly hurt. She rushed out, heart pounding, and couldn't find her anywhere. Eventually she found her hiding behind the microwave, staring out with this terrified look on her face. I somehow slept through all of it, but when Sadie woke me up and told me what had happened, I remembered the dream I'd been having. In it, I was just falling down an endless staircase. That was the whole dream, just falling and falling. After that, Lady started hiding behind the microwave all the time. It became her safe place, and that scared us more than anything, honestly. We worried about her when we were gone. We started staying home more because we didn't want to leave her there alone. Then, the strangest confirmation came from downstairs. At the time, the lower floor was being rented by a native man named Jeff, who made regalia for dance ceremonies. One night, Sadie and I had a little fire going out back, and Jeff came over to smoke and chat. The conversation was casual at first, and then out of nowhere he asked, "Y'all got something weird going on upstairs?" I remember just staring at him. I asked, "Like paranormal weird?" And he said, "Yeah, this place is haunted. For real." That hit us hard because there was no real reason for him to know we'd been talking about it. It's not like we were shouting ghost stories out the window. So I asked him what he'd experienced. He said he'd had a few unsettling things happen downstairs, but what really got him was the noise from upstairs. He'd see us leave through the big front windows, watch our car pull away, and then minutes later hear somebody walking around up there. Not light little sounds either, not cat feet. Heavy footsteps. A grown man pacing back and forth from one side of the apartment to the other. The chills I got hearing that. I still remember them. Then he told us about one night he'd pulled up and seen a black figure moving inside downstairs. He thought somebody had broken in. He grabbed a huge knife, went in ready for a confrontation, and found the place locked and empty. No one there. Jeff said he'd been wanting to talk to us for a while, but didn't want to sound crazy. Then he offered to help. He told us he wanted to smudge the place, but that doing only downstairs wouldn't matter if whatever was there was throughout the whole building. He had a blend of cedars from different places, and said he'd smoke out his side if we did the same upstairs. He told us to open the windows and doors, let the smoke move through, and speak out loud. Tell whatever was there that it had overstayed its welcome, that the place belonged to the living now, and it needed to move on. So we did exactly that. Jeff texted me when he started downstairs, and Sadie and I began upstairs at the same time. I know this might sound dramatic, but the difference afterward was immediate. The apartment felt lighter, peaceful even. Lady stopped reacting to that corner. She stopped hiding. The strange, oppressive feeling that had settled over everything just lifted. Maybe somebody could call it placebo, and maybe that's fair, but all I know is it worked for us. Nothing happened after that. Not one thing. Before long, Sadie and I moved into a house, and thankfully, nothing followed us. Lady never showed any of those strange behaviors again either. After us, my brother and his wife lived there on and off, and she said the place still felt creepy, but she never had a concrete story to tell. Then in 2025, one of my longtime friends moved in with his wife. I hadn't really brought up the haunting stuff to him before. We weren't talking much back when I lived there, so it just never came up. But later on, after we'd started hanging out more and playing music together, his wife came with him to a jam session, and I casually asked how she liked the apartment. She said, "I really like it, but I don't like being there alone." I asked if anything strange had happened. She said not exactly, just that she always felt like she wasn't alone, and their dogs would get stirred up over nothing. My friend joked that dogs do that anyway, but then I asked her if there was one particular spot in the apartment that bothered her most. She started to answer, and I stopped her. I pulled out my phone and typed a description of the place I was thinking of. I wanted to see if she'd say the same thing without me leading her. Then I asked, "Okay, where?" And she said, "That corner by the bathroom, the one with the little closet." I showed her my phone, and she just stared at it. That was the moment that really stayed with me. Out of all the places in that apartment, it was always that same corner. Always. I've wondered a lot about why. I've wondered whether that old story about the man from decades ago connects to it somehow. I've wondered if that was the exact spot where something terrible happened. Truth is, I don't know. I just know too many people felt the same thing in the same place for me to dismiss it completely. And even now, when I think about that apartment, that's the part I see first. That corner by the bathroom. I work maintenance at an apartment complex, and for a while there was this resident who kept reporting the same thing over and over, banging on his wall late at night. He was convinced it was coming from the woman in the unit next door. The problem was, she always denied it, and nobody could ever prove anything, so there really wasn't much we could do. Now, this building is mainly for elderly residents and people dealing with mental health challenges, so complaints like that weren't exactly unusual. Most of the time, things had an explanation, or at least, that's what I always told myself. Eventually, the woman next door moved out, and I was the one assigned to clean and prep the apartment. For the first few days, everything seemed completely normal. Nothing out of place, nothing strange. But on the last day I was there finishing up, something happened that I still can't explain. The second I stepped into that apartment that morning, I felt it. Not cold exactly, but this deep chill ran through me anyway. You know that feeling when the air itself seems heavy, like something is pressing down on you? That's the only way I can describe it. I kept working, thinking maybe I was just tired or having an off day, but the feeling never left. It stayed with me the entire time I was in there. And honestly, if that had been all, I probably would have brushed it off. But then, right at the end of the day, I was carrying my tools out into the hallway. I'd already stepped a few feet away from the apartment when I suddenly felt this strong need to turn around. I still don't know why. I just did. When I looked back at the door, I stopped cold. There was a gap under the front door, maybe about an inch or so, enough that you could see light and shadow from the other side. And under that door, I could clearly see the shadow of what looked like 2 feet, like someone was standing just inside the apartment, right near the door. I remember staring, trying to make sense of it, because I knew nobody was in there. I had been inside that unit all day. I would have seen anyone. My first thought was maybe it was some kind of light reflection, maybe a trick of the sun through the window. But then, the shadow moved. Not flickered, not shifted, moved. It looked exactly like a person turning and walking away from the door. I'll tell you right now, I did not go back in there to investigate. Absolutely not. I just picked up my pace and kept walking. Later on, once I'd calmed down a little, I tried to explain it away. I went outside and checked around the building, thinking maybe someone had passed by the window and cast a shadow just right. But the layout didn't support that. The apartment windows faced the shaded side of the building, and with the roof hanging over that side, sunlight didn't hit in a way that could have made that kind of shadow. The sun was too high, the angles were wrong, and there just wasn't any clear way for a person outside to create what I saw under that door. I even considered whether maybe someone was shining a flashlight or some other light source from outside. That's the only halfway logical explanation I've ever been able to come up with. But even that feels like a stretch. The truth is, I still don't know what I saw. And yeah, before anyone asks, people have passed away in that building before. That's just the reality of a place where most of the residents are elderly. As for that specific apartment, I can't say for sure, but I wouldn't be surprised. One more thing that makes it even stranger. The resident who used to complain about the banging? He never made another complaint after that woman moved out. And the oddest part of all, the woman who had lived there, Marina, used a wheelchair. It was legs. So, a few winters ago, my ex and I rented this cozy little Airbnb just a bit outside Port Angeles in western Washington. It was right around Christmas, tucked away in a quiet rural area, and the whole place felt still in that way only snowy places do. There was already a soft layer of snow on the ground, and more kept drifting down while we were there, which felt kind of magical since we almost never get snow where we live. We spent the trip doing all the simple, comforting things. We made boozy coffee shakes, curled up under blankets watching old movies, and drove into town here and there to poke around little shops and scenic spots. It was one of those small getaways that feels peaceful without needing much of a plan. At night, though, it got incredibly dark outside. No streetlights, no traffic, just silence. Every now and then I'd hear something out in the yard, probably a deer or some other animal stepping through the snow, and that part actually felt kind of beautiful. What bothered me more was this strange rustling sound coming from the direction of the bedroom closet. The place was a small manufactured home, and with all the wildlife around, I told myself it was probably just some little animal trying to get warm underneath or inside the walls. Eventually, I drifted off, though I'm a light sleeper, and I kept waking up to that faint scratching and rustling off and on through the night. The bed didn't help either. It definitely wasn't mine, so I don't think I really slept deeply until close to morning. And then, out of nowhere, I woke up feeling like someone had their hand on my throat. It was sudden, firm pressure right across the front of my neck. I started coughing immediately, and just as fast as it came, it was gone. I remember jolting awake and snapping at my ex, thinking maybe his arm had somehow landed across me in his sleep. It didn't really make sense, but when you wake up like that, your brain reaches for whatever explanation it can. He turned toward me all groggy and confused and just mumbled, "What?" And in that instant, I knew it hadn't been him. He'd been sleeping with his back to me. Later that morning, when I was alone in the bedroom, I looked toward the closet and told whatever was there to leave me alone. Not politely either, just very directly. After that, I still heard a little rustling the following night, but nothing touched me again. It definitely shook me in the moment, that feeling of being strangled awake. But honestly, I've had enough strange experiences over the years that I've learned not to completely fall apart every time something unexplainable happens. That doesn't mean I enjoy it. It's unsettling every single time. But compared to some other things I've experienced, this felt more like one sharp, eerie incident than something that lingered. And once we left, that was it. Nothing followed me. Nothing happened afterward. It just became one more story I still think about whenever winter rolls around and everything gets quiet. I was about 14 when this happened, and even now, years later, I can still picture it like it was right in front of me. It was a Saturday night, and I was home alone. My parents were both working late, and my older sister, Marissa, was sleeping over at a friend's place. That kind of thing wasn't unusual for us. We were pretty used to being in the house by ourselves, so I never really thought of myself as someone who got scared easily, especially not just because it was dark or quiet. It was close to midnight when I finally decided to go to bed. I climbed up into the top bunk, turned off my bedroom light, and got settled in. A few seconds later, I realized I'd left the bathroom light on. The bathroom was right across from my room, and because we always slept with our bedroom doors open back then, the light spilled out so brightly it lit up most of the hallway. So I started to climb back down from the bunk to go switch it off. And that's when I saw it. There was this tall, shadowy figure stepping out of the bathroom. I remember it so clearly it still unsettles me to talk about. It looked too tall for the doorway, like it had to reach up, grip the top of the frame, and duck its head to get through. Then it turned slowly and moved toward my sister's room. When it got there, it did the same thing again, grabbed the top of the doorway, lowered itself, and walked inside. The whole thing probably lasted 10 seconds, maybe less, but in my mind, it stretched out forever. What makes it so hard for me to dismiss is how clear everything looked. The hallway was bright. I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't half awake. I saw it, plain as day, and the second I realized what I was looking at, fear hit me so hard I completely froze. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just slowly lowered myself back onto the bed and stayed completely still. I remember staring through this narrow gap between my mattress and the bed frame so I could keep my eyes on my sister's doorway, just waiting for that thing to come back out. But it never did. I stayed there, frozen, listening to every little sound in the house, too scared to move and too scared to even call out. I don't know why I didn't grab my phone or run downstairs. I think I was just in shock. Eventually, I heard the front door open. My parents were finally home. I jumped down from the bed, bolted downstairs, and told them what I'd seen. They looked confused more than anything and asked why I was still awake. That's when we realized it was already around 1 in the morning. I had been lying there, staring at that doorway, for over an hour. I told them everything, every detail, but they didn't believe me. I get it, I guess. To them, it probably sounded like a tired kid spooked by shadows. But it didn't feel like that. It felt real. Real in a way I still can't explain. That night, I shut my bedroom door before I went back upstairs, and after that, I never slept with it open again. When I told Marissa the next morning, she started closing hers too. And honestly, when you reduce it down, I know how it sounds. A teenager home alone late at night sees something strange and gets scared. That's an easy story to shrug off. But what stays with me is how vivid it was. The shape of it, the way it moved, the way my whole body locked up before I could even think. It's been about 10 years now. I still don't really believe in ghosts or spirits or anything like that. But I also can't explain what I saw that night. And that's the part that still gets to me. When I was little, I used to spend my school holidays at my mother's house in the village. Not too far from her home, maybe a short walk down the road, there was a path leading toward the next village. Along that path stood a huge old banyan tree, the kind that seemed ancient even to a child. For as long as I can remember, people spoke about that road in voices, especially after sunset. The elders said that many years earlier, a young woman named Mira had been killed near that tree. After that, the place was never quite the same. People in the village had all kinds of stories. Some said that if they passed that way alone, they could hear a woman calling, almost as if she were just behind them. Others said they felt a sudden shove from the back, even when no one was there. And some talked about a strange wave of fear that came over them for no reason at all, like the air itself had turned heavy. What made everyone take it seriously was that a few people were actually found unconscious near the tree. By morning, villagers would discover them lying by the roadside or a little farther away, with no clear idea of what had happened. After enough of those incidents, people stopped using that road in the evening altogether. Even during the late afternoon, some said the place felt wrong, too quiet, too tense, too unsettling. So for months, everyone took the longer way around. Finally, the villagers called in a sorcerer from another area. He listened to everything and said the spirit of the young woman was still trapped there. For 7 days, he performed rituals near the banyan tree. Then, at the end of it all, he drove a large iron nail deep into the trunk and told the villagers that the spirit had been pinned there and would not wander anymore. And strangely enough, after that, the stories stopped. People slowly began using the road again, though many still hurried past that tree and avoided looking at it too long. I went back to the village not long ago, and I saw that same banyan tree still standing there. It looked older, quieter somehow. And the nail? It was still there. I still remember this so clearly because it happened during the lockdown in 2020, when life already felt eerie and uncertain. At the time, I was living with my mom in this old apartment building. It had 3 levels, and we were on the first floor. There were flats at each corner, with this open hollow space in the middle, and directly across from us was one apartment everyone in the building quietly avoided. People always said something was wrong with that place. So, the night this started, it was October 9th, 2020. Nothing unusual was going on. I was lying there playing a game on my phone, and my mom was watching one of her usual shows on TV. It felt like any other late night. Then I checked the time. It was 11:35 p.m. I got up to head to the bathroom, and the second I opened the door, I heard this strange sound. It's honestly hard to describe even now. It wasn't exactly a voice, and it wasn't exactly a noise either. It was like something between a whisper and a vibration, like the air itself had shifted for a second. It made me pause, but I brushed it off and kept going. I had only been in the bathroom for maybe half a minute when I suddenly heard screaming from the flat next to ours. Not just startled yelling, real panic. Everyone came rushing out into the hallway. Our neighbor, a woman who had only moved in recently, was shaking so badly she could barely talk. She said she had been tidying up her room when she saw a figure standing in the corner, just watching her. And then, right in front of her, it disappeared. The unsettling part was that she had no idea about the stories people told about that side of the building. She didn't know anything about the apartment across from us, or the rumors attached to it. I wish I could say that was the end of it, because honestly, that would have been easier to accept. But exactly 1 week later, it happened again. That night, I was sitting at home working on something, completely focused, when I heard that same strange sound. The second it reached my ears, this cold feeling ran through me. I turned and looked at the clock immediately. 11:35 p.m., the exact same time. This time, I didn't hesitate. I rushed straight to the door, and before I could even fully open it, another scream rang out, this time from a different neighbor. We all stepped out again, hearts pounding, and found him standing there pale and breathless. He said he had seen someone standing near his bedroom entrance. When he got up in shock, whatever it was darted toward the front door and vanished. Just gone. After that, nothing else happened while we stayed there, and we lived in that building for almost another year. No more sounds, no more screams, no more sightings. But even now, I can't shake the feeling that whatever it wasn't just there to scare people. It felt deliberate, like it was appearing for a reason, like it was trying, in its own strange way, to get someone's attention, or maybe tell us something we were never able to understand. So, back when I was in 8th and 9th grade, I got really pulled into paranormal stuff. I had a girlfriend then who was super into witchy things, and through her, I ended up getting fascinated by it too. Before long, we were using a Ouija board constantly, like almost every day after school. After a few weeks, something weird started happening. Every time we asked who we were talking to, it gave us the same answer. Him. At first, it honestly didn't scare us that much. We were kids, and it all felt more exciting than dangerous. But over time, the tone changed. It got mean. The board started swearing at us, telling us to leave it alone, telling us to screw off. One day, I got so irritated that I just snapped and shoved the board right off the table in the middle of a session. After that, I backed away from it for a little while. But the weirdness didn't stop. A couple weeks later, I was working a late shift stocking shelves at Walmart. Out of nowhere, I heard somebody whisper my name. I figured I imagined it. Then I heard it again, louder this time. I checked the next aisle thinking maybe someone was messing with me, but nobody was there. Then it happened a third time, clear enough that I actually shouted, "Okay, who keeps calling me?" Nothing answered. Maybe half a minute later, one of my coworkers came up to me looking seriously unsettled. She asked, "Did you just hear your name called 3 times?" I said yeah, and she told me she was a medium, and that hearing your name called like that could mean someone in your family was about to die. Now, I've always been interested in paranormal stories, but I'm skeptical too. So I remember thinking it was kind of wild that she introduced herself as a medium with that much confidence. I tried to keep the conversation normal, and started talking about what I wanted to do with my life, my plans, all that. She cut me off and said, "Every time you talk about your future, I hear this ugly little laugh. Something negative is attached to you. It doesn't want good things for you." She had no idea about the board. None. And the second she said that, my stomach dropped, because in my head I immediately connected it to him. When I got home and finally went to bed, the house phone rang not long after. I heard my mom out in the hallway saying, "Oh no, I'm so sorry." I was downstairs before she even hung up. Somebody in our extended family had just passed away. It wasn't someone I was especially close with, but still, after what had just happened at work, it hit me hard. You'd think that would have been enough to make me stop, but honestly, at that age, it made me more curious. It scared me, sure, but it also made everything feel real in a way I hadn't felt before. So not long after that, I invited my best friend and my girlfriend over to my parents' basement to use the board again. That ended up being the last time I touched one for years. It was the middle of the afternoon, bright outside, nobody else home. We'd been sitting there maybe 20 minutes when all three of us suddenly smelled breakfast sausage cooking. Not faintly either. It was strong, unmistakable, like somebody was frying it right beside us. There was absolutely no reason for that smell to be there. So we asked the board if that was him, and it answered yes. Later on, my parents came home and made dinner. We stopped to eat, then went right back downstairs. By that point, we were pushing it, really pushing it, asking it to prove it was there, asking it to touch us, moving around the room trying to feel cold spots. Then my girlfriend and I did something unbelievably stupid. I asked if it could possess her. The planchette moved faster than I had ever seen. Straight to yes. And then it started counting down. The bulb over our heads started buzzing, then flickering, and then it went dead. Total darkness. I panicked instantly and ran upstairs screaming. When I got to the living room, my dad was still sitting there, watching TV. And through the front window, I saw this huge white flash outside. The transformer across the street blew. What stuck with me was the order of it. In my mind, the transformer should have caused the power to go. But the bulb above us had already buzzed and died first. Then, after we were already upstairs, the transformer blew. My friend was still downstairs crashing into furniture and swearing because he'd tried to run in the dark. In all the chaos, trying to explain to my parents what had happened, I completely forgot about my girlfriend for a few seconds. Then she came walking upstairs, slowly, almost casually, like nothing had happened at all. No panic, no fear, just calm. She walked past me and muttered something in this voice that was way deeper than her normal one. It was low enough that it didn't even sound like her. I stopped and said, "What?" And she turned to me in her normal voice and said, "What?" like she hadn't spoken. Then she did the same thing to my friend. I told her she needed to go home, and she did. My friend and I were both wrecked after that. We slept with lights on for weeks. I was so freaked out that I actually left the house later that night, just because I couldn't settle down. My parents told me afterward it was all coincidence, that maybe a branch had hit something outside. I accepted that for a long time. But years later, at a family gathering, it came up again, and they admitted they'd only called it a coincidence to calm me down. There hadn't even been any wind that night. A few years passed before I touched a board again. By then, I was in high school and dating a new girl, Sadie. I told her everything that had happened back in 8th grade. Instead of getting creeped out, she and her sister got completely fascinated. They wanted to try it themselves. Sadie's dad lived out in the country in this huge house with a finished basement and a long hallway that always felt wrong somehow. You know that feeling when you turn off the light and suddenly it feels like you need to sprint because you don't want to be the last person in the dark? That was the vibe of that hallway. Even before we ever used the board there, they hated walking through it at night. So of course that's exactly where they wanted to set everything up. We went down into the rec room beside the hallway, turned off the main lights, and sat with just a few candles lit. I started by asking if anyone was there. At first, the board barely moved. It was painfully slow, but the longer we sat there, the faster it started going. At one point, I remembered hearing people say that if everybody closed their eyes, the board wouldn't be able to spell anything real. So we tested it. We closed our eyes, kept our fingers on the planchette, and it didn't spell a single thing. We opened our eyes and started laughing. The whole mood broke. I leaned back and started saying, "Yeah, okay, this is total bull," and then the door to the hallway slammed. Not drifted, not clicked shut, slammed, hard, violently, like someone had put their whole body into it. The girls screamed and told me to go check. I looked around for an open window, a draft, anything. Nothing. It was winter. The house was shut tight. I ran upstairs thinking maybe someone was pranking us, but when I got there, Sadie's dad, his girlfriend, and one of the older sisters were just sitting in the living room watching TV. Nobody had moved. Nobody was out of breath. Nobody even looked guilty. They were just confused when I asked. The second I said that, we heard knocking from the little side room off the rec room. That became the pattern. Anytime we questioned whether something was there, something happened. A knock, a sound, a shift in the room. A few weeks later, we used the board there again, and this time there was no slow start. The second our hands touched it, it moved fast, aggressively fast. It felt exactly like that old energy from years before, the same chaotic, hostile feeling. At one point, the planchette shot right off the board, slid across the coffee table toward me, and dropped straight into my lap. We kept asking what it was, and every time we asked its name, it gave us a different one. It felt like we were talking to more than one thing, like one was trying to seem harmless and another wanted us scared. Then I had this thought that hit me all at once. What if it's all the same thing pretending? So I asked, "Are you one spirit pretending to be different ones?" It moved to yes. I got chills all over. I looked at Sadie and told her, "I think this might be him." Then I asked directly, "Are you him?" Yes. We asked if it was good or bad. It spelled out evil. We asked if it wanted us there. Yes again. And during all these pauses, we kept catching movement out of the corners of our eyes. Those quick little shadow movements that make you whip your head around even though you know you probably won't see anything when you look directly. Finally, I asked, "What do you want?" It moved slower then, deliberately. K-I-L-L. And when it got to the last letter, it hovered there, making these tiny circles over the L like it wanted to make absolutely sure we understood. We asked who it wanted killed. It spelled out Sadie's sister's name. That was it for me. I said, "Nope, forget this." I forced the planchette to goodbye, and I told them I was done. Completely done. That summer, my parents rented a little cottage near the beach. By then, Sadie and I were fighting all the time, and honestly, the relationship was already falling apart. The cottage was tiny. My parents had one room, and right across the hall was the room Sadie and I were sleeping in. Above our room, there was this little loft space with a wooden hatch and a ladder leading up to it. I slept up there. She slept in the room below. That night, we ended up talking again about the stuff at her dad's house, especially the door slam. Then, because we were young and stupid and already annoyed with each other, we got into an argument and went to bed angry. Sometime around 3 in the morning, I woke up to a whisper saying my name. At first, I ignored it. I figured Sadie was still awake and trying to talk to me from below. Then it came again, clearer. I whispered back, irritated, "What do you want?" And from the bed below, Sadie answered, "That wasn't me, but I heard it too." I froze. I looked over toward the hatch opening, and there was the outline of a head rising up into the loft, long hair to the shoulders. In the dark, it looked exactly like her silhouette. I snapped, "Sadie, get off the ladder." And from below me, her voice cracked in fear and she said, "That's not me. I can see it too." That's the part I still can't shake. I was looking at what looked like a head and shoulders rising into the loft. She was looking from below at what looked like a body standing on the ladder. We were both seeing different parts of the same figure at the same time. We both lunged for the lights. Once they were on, that was it. No more sleep. No more darkness. I dragged my pillow over by the hatch and stayed there the rest of the night, keeping her in sight, both of us wide awake until morning. And after that, I was done with Ouija boards for good. That was the moment I finally felt, deep down, that whatever had been following me all those years had gotten close enough. And I never wanted to invite it in again. Hey, I've been living in this house for around 6 years now, and for a long time I kept telling myself all the weird stuff happening here probably wasn't a big deal. Little things, you know? Catching movement out of the corner of my eye, hearing sounds I couldn't explain, that kind of thing. I brushed it off for years because I didn't want to overreact. But about a year ago, it started feeling different. Heavier. Less like random little moments and more like something was actually there. One night a few months back, my friend Mason was over. We were just hanging out in the kitchen, talking like normal, and I stepped away for a minute to use the bathroom. While I was in there, I heard him calling my name from my bedroom down the hall. Over and over, just, "Ava, come here." But the voice felt off. It sounded like Mason, but not fully. Like something was wrong with it. I called back, "What?" And instead of answering me normally, it just repeated the same thing again. "Come here." So I came out of the bathroom and went to see what he wanted, and when I called his name, he answered me from the kitchen. The kitchen. And that's what messed me up, because I had just heard him calling me from my bedroom, which was all the way across the house. I asked him why he was messing with me, and he looked genuinely confused. He told me he'd never left the kitchen, and he hadn't called my name at all. At first, I thought he was joking, but Mason's the kind of person who breaks character almost immediately if he's messing around. He swore he didn't do it, and I believed him. Honestly, I still do. To this day, neither of us can explain who or what was calling me. Since then, things have gotten stranger. Stuff moves when I'm not paying attention. Objects slide or fall for no reason. And a couple of times things have come straight off shelves when I was alone and hit me. I've heard breathing in other rooms when nobody else was there. The worst place by far is the basement, especially the laundry room. Every single time I go down there, I hear something. Small noises, shifting sounds, sometimes what feels like movement just out of sight. Once or twice, I've even caught what looked like a figure standing in the dark. And it's not just me imagining it. My family and my friends have all said that room feels wrong. Ever since I was little, I've always been really sensitive to energy, and whatever is in that laundry room feels deeply negative. It's not just creepy, it feels bad. Like the air changes the second you step near it. There was another moment I can't stop thinking about. The power had gone out one night, and I was trying to make my way into my room in the dark. I didn't have my phone or a flashlight, so I was basically feeling my way around. Right as I stepped inside, I felt something brush against my shoulder. Not like fabric, not like I bumped into furniture. It felt deliberate, like something touched me. And when I finally checked the room, there was nothing there that could have caused it. That's the part I keep coming back to. I've never felt this way anywhere else. It's just this house. And I know how this sounds, but I'm not making this up, and I'm not disconnected from reality. I do have a therapist, and I'm not ignoring my mental health. I've thought about every logical explanation I can. but I'm scared. More scared than I used to be. So there have been 2 times in my life when I felt completely certain I had a real encounter with something paranormal. I've moved around a lot over the years and lived in all kinds of places. Most of the strange things people talk about, I usually think can be explained away. Creaky houses, odd noises, overactive imaginations. I really do think most things have a logical reason behind them, until they don't. And out of everywhere I've ever lived, only 2 places ever made me feel, deep down, that something was truly wrong there. The first experience happened when I was about 11. What makes it stay with me even now is that I still can't explain it. It was a long time ago, and I still think about it more often than I'd like to admit. My sister and I were home alone that night. My bedroom had always felt off. It's hard to describe, but it was the kind of room where you never really felt alone. At night especially, there was this constant feeling of being watched. Sometimes, lying in bed, I'd even feel what seemed like cold breath against the back of my neck, just enough to make me freeze up under the blankets. That evening, we left my room to make ourselves something to eat. We didn't hear the door close, didn't think anything of it. But when we came back down the hall with our plates, the bedroom door was shut tight and locked. And the strange part is, the lock only worked from the inside. It was one of those little twist locks on the handle. There was no keyhole, no way to lock it from outside the room. My mom always insisted the door must have swung shut on its own, and that maybe one of us had turned the lock without realizing it before we left. But the window was closed, and even if the door had somehow drifted shut, I still can't make sense of how it would have locked itself. What stayed with me even more was how my mom reacted afterward. She had the lock removed not long after that. Then, within a few weeks, we moved out. For a while, we stayed at the house of the man who later became my stepfather, even though it made her commute way longer every day. Looking back now, I honestly think she knew something wasn't right in that house. I think she just didn't want us to be scared. The second experience happened years later, when I was 24. One night, my electronics started acting up in the weirdest way. Not all at once, just one thing after another, like something was trying to get my attention. I woke up at around 3 in the morning because a personal massager I owned had turned itself on by itself. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it scared the life out of me. I turned it off, tried to laugh it off, and went back to sleep. A little while later, it turned on again. I shut it off a second time, then a third. By that point, I was so unnerved that I finally took it outside and tossed it straight into the dumpster. What really got to me was that after that, it never made another sound. For the next few days, I'd walk past that dumpster half expecting to hear it rattling around in there, just to prove to myself it had only been broken. But every time, there was nothing. Just silence. After that, my computer started shutting itself off at random. I tried to be rational about it. I checked the temperature, messed with the settings, convinced myself it had to be overheating or pulling too much power. But eventually, I got so frustrated that I snapped. Out loud, to an empty room, I said, "Don't you dare shut this off again." The second the words left my mouth, the computer went black. That was the moment my stomach dropped. Not because one thing malfunctioned, but because 2 different things responded at once, like something had heard me. I moved out not long after that, and ever since then, I haven't had another experience like either of those. But those 2 places, I still can't explain them, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to. You know, I was raised on the kind of stories that settle into your bones. My father used to tell them in that plain, steady way some people have, like he wasn't trying to scare you. just tell you the truth as he remembered it. He grew up on a sharecropper's farm outside Kingsport, Tennessee, back in the late 1950s and early 1960s. He was the youngest of 8 children, though because of the age gaps, there were usually only a few of them at home at any one time. For part of his childhood, the house also held his mother, his father, and his grandfather. It was a crowded life, hard in the ways country life often was, and some of the hardest parts came from his father's drinking. My dad always said his father could be gentle when he was sober, but when he drank, the whole feeling of the house changed. Everybody knew it. Everybody felt it. One evening, just as daylight was giving out, his parents got into one of their worst fights. My grandmother gathered up the children who were home and hurried them out of the house. They ran uphill, away from the yelling, away from the danger, and hid in an old tobacco shed on another part of the farm. That shed had once been a little house, years before their time. By then it was mostly used for storage, stacked with tobacco sticks and smelling like dust, wood, and old seasons. They stood there in the dark, trying not to breathe too loud, peeking through the opening as my father's dad moved around the yard below, searching for them. He circled the house and the outbuildings for a while, then finally went back inside. After that, they stayed put, waiting for things to calm down. And as the dark settled in completely, they started hearing something from the back of the shed. At first, it was faint, then clearer. A baby crying. Not outside, not far away. Inside that shed, back where the tobacco sticks were piled. 2 farm dogs had followed them up there and stayed close while they hid. When the crying started, those dogs pricked up and trotted toward the sound, disappearing into the darkness at the back. Everybody held still. Then, just seconds later, those same dogs came flying back past them like something had chased them out. They bolted from the shed and tore downhill at a dead run. That was all the rest of the family needed. My dad said they ran right after the dogs, nobody willing to stay and find out what a crying baby was doing in an empty tobacco shed in the middle of the night. The next morning, in full daylight, they went back to look. There was nothing there. No baby, no animal caught somewhere, nothing at all. That was one of the first stories he ever told me. Another one centered around his grandfather, a man who had his own habits and routines. He'd stay out late in town some nights, drinking, and when he came home, he wouldn't go through the front door. Instead, he'd slip into his room through a window everyone kept unlocked for him. He did it so he wouldn't wake my grandmother, but it never worked. The window always rattled and groaned when it opened, and the bed springs squealed when he eased himself down onto the mattress. Everybody in that house knew the sound of him coming home. Then he died. And not long after that, they started hearing the same thing. That old window opening in the night. The same scrape, the same rattle. Then the sound of somebody climbing into that bed. The first time it happened, they figured one of the children must have come in that way for some reason. They checked the room. It was empty. The next time they checked faster. Still empty. Dad said the boy turned around, quiet as a shadow, and headed home. Never came back. Finally, my grandmother got tired of the whole thing. She told the boys to drag that bed out of the room and move it somewhere else. And once they did, the noises stopped. Just like that. Never happened again. There was another room with its own trouble. An old iron pot hung in the fireplace, and inside it rested a big brass spoon. They hardly used them, but every now and then, out of nowhere, they'd hear the sharp ringing of that spoon striking the pot. Every time they checked, nobody was there. Nothing was moving. No explanation at all. My grandmother endured it until she'd had enough, then took the spoon out for good. Once she did, the ringing never came back. What stayed with my father most, though, wasn't just the sounds. It was the feeling. He always said the strange things in that house came with a change in the atmosphere. Not cold air, not a breeze, nothing like that. He said the best way he knew to describe it was that the air felt charged, almost like the house was holding its breath. You could be going about your chores, doing ordinary things, and then little by little, you'd realize something had shifted. The whole place would feel wrong. He told me my grandmother felt it too, maybe more than anyone. She'd sometimes be coming back down toward the house after milking or working outside, carrying on with the day as usual, and before she even reached the porch, she'd know. Something about the house would feel bad. The closer she got, the worse it became. Then she'd hear it, crashing from inside like furniture being overturned, dishes breaking, things slamming into walls. The first time it happened, she grabbed one of her sons and ran back with him, sure they were about to find the house wrecked. But when they opened the door, everything was in its place. No broken dishes, no overturned chairs, no sign of any disturbance at all. After that, when it happened again, she handled it differently. She simply turned around and stayed away for a while. An hour later, she'd return, and the feeling would be gone. The house would be quiet, perfectly normal. One of my favorite stories he told me happened in the kitchen. It was just him and my grandmother at home that evening, getting supper started before the others came in from work. He was helping her prepare things, and after a while he started to feel it, that charge in the air. He noticed my grandmother had gone still too, glancing around without saying a word. Then came the knocking. Loud, hard. Not just somebody at the door, but the kind of pounding that feels angry. My dad moved automatically to answer it, and my grandmother snapped his name so sharply it stopped him cold. She told him not to open that door. She just stood there staring at it. Then the knocking came again, even harder. He started toward it a second time without thinking, and this time she caught him by the shoulders and held him back. Both of them stood there looking at that door, knowing full well it wasn't even locked. And then they heard footsteps, heavy footsteps. They began at that very door, the one that had never opened, and crossed the kitchen floor. Slowly, deliberately, right in front of them. My father said those steps moved from one side of the kitchen to the other, as if somebody unseen had walked straight through the room. His mother and he just stood there, frozen, watching nothing and hearing everything. The footsteps reached the far door, then stopped. Silence. And the second it went quiet, my grandmother grabbed him and ran. She yanked open the nearest door and pulled him outside so fast they barely touched the steps. He told another kitchen story too, one from a bright daytime, which somehow made it worse. Slow, loud, clear as anything. Only the hallway was in full view, and nobody was there. All three of them went silent. The footsteps stopped too. They stared at the empty hall, then at each other, wide-eyed and holding their breath. After a few moments, when nothing else happened, they started laughing the way people do when they're scared and trying not to be. One of his sisters, trying to be brave or maybe just trying to break the spell, called out, "Well then, come on in and eat with us." And instantly the footsteps started again, only this time they were running, straight toward the kitchen. My dad said the three of them screamed at once. Both sisters grabbed him and took off out of that house in a blur. He always laughed a little when he told that part, saying he had never seen either of them move that fast before or since. That's how he told those stories. Calm, matter of fact, never dressed up more than needed. And maybe that's why they stayed with me. Because he never sounded like somebody inventing something. He sounded like somebody remembering. And to this day, when I think about that old farmhouse, I don't picture ghosts in white sheets or anything dramatic like that. I picture a place that listened, a place that held on to anger, grief, habit, and fear. A place where the air could change before anything happened. And a place where, every now and then, something unseen seemed to decide it wanted to be noticed.